The room was eerily silent when Amber first read the letter. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, casting long shadows on the kitchen table where she sat. Her eyes darted over the page in disbelief, heart pounding as she tried to process the words in front of her. Amber, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. I can't do this anymore. Our marriage, everything we had, it's over. I've left. I'm sorry. The words felt cold, distant, as if they had come from someone she barely knew. After 10 years of marriage, Michael had simply walked away. No conversation, no final argument, just a note. He left her in their suburban Chicago home without so much as a goodbye, abandoning her as if their decade together had meant nothing. For hours, Amber sat motionless at the table, her fingers crumpling the letter in her lap. She had known they were going through a rough patch. The long hours Michael spent at the office, his increasing distance from her. But this, she never imagined he would leave like this. The soft ticking of the clock on the wall was the only sound breaking the suffocating silence. Hello, viewer. Thank you for being here. I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. Now let's continue with the story. Their house, once filled with shared dreams, quiet laughter, and tender moments, now felt hollow, like a shell of the life they had built together. Amber ran her fingers through her hair, feeling the weight of the world crushing her chest. She thought of all the times they had promised each other forever. Their wedding day flashed through her mind, how they had held hands, vowing to stand by each other in sickness and in health. And now, here she was, abandoned without warning. The pain was unbearable, but so was the confusion. Why hadn't Michael tried to talk to her? Was there someone else? Had he been lying about his late nights at work? As the hours dragged on, Amber's emotions shifted from shock to anger. How could he? How could he just leave her like this? Without an explanation, without so much as a conversation. 10 years of marriage, reduced to a single sheet of paper. She stood abruptly, her body trembling with rage. With each breath, the numbness in her heart started to give way to a raw, fiery pain. She threw the letter onto the floor and swept the stack of unpaid bills off the counter, the papers scattering like confetti in the wake of her outburst. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't bother wiping them away. By the time night fell, Amber was sitting on the floor of the living room, the house now dark and cold. She was utterly alone, her once secure life shattered in a matter of moments. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, a reflection of the storm raging inside her. Her thoughts raced as she tried to piece together what had gone wrong, but deep down, she knew. Over the past few years, Michael had become a stranger to her. The man she once loved, the man who had held her hand through the good and bad times, had drifted away, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of her broken life. But as the house creaked with the shifting wind outside, Amber felt something unfamiliar growing inside her. Resolve. She wasn't going to let this destroy her. She had survived before Michael, and she would survive without him. It wouldn't be easy, but she would find a way to move forward. There was something else, something she hadn't told Michael. In the midst of their crumbling relationship, Amber had discovered she was pregnant. But after their last fight, she had decided to keep the news to herself, unsure if a baby could save a marriage that seemed to be already lost. Now, that secret weighed heavier than ever. Wiping her tears, Amber rose from the floor. She placed a protective hand over her abdomen, where a new life was growing, a life that Michael would never know about. She whispered to herself in the stillness, "You don't need him. You've got this. You'll be okay." But as she turned off the last light in the house, the future seemed more uncertain than ever. She wasn't sure how she would navigate the storm ahead, but one thing was certain. She would never forgive Michael for leaving her like this. Not now, not ever. It had been 10 years since Michael Johnson left his old life behind. In that time, he had rebuilt everything from the ground up. His career as a businessman had flourished. He now owned multiple companies, was married to Samantha, a driven and glamorous woman, and his wealth had grown beyond what he ever imagined. To the outside world, he had it all. But deep inside, there was always a shadow lingering in the corners of his mind, a memory of the life he had once lived and the woman he had once loved. Today, as he stood in the bustling Chicago O'Hare Airport, waiting for his flight to New York for yet another business deal, that shadow seemed particularly persistent. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His phone buzzed with texts from Samantha, reminding him of the dinner they were hosting that weekend with some influential investors. But his focus kept drifting. He wasn't sure why. Maybe it was the exhaustion from constantly living on the edge of success, or maybe it was something deeper. As he absent-mindedly watched the crowd of travelers weaving through the terminal, his eyes landed on a figure that made his heart stop. At first, he thought it was a trick of the mind, a product of his own guilty conscience. But there was no denying it. Walking through the terminal, holding the hand of a young boy, was Amber, his Amber. His chest tightened and his pulse quickened. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was a little longer, the lines around her eyes slightly more pronounced, but she still carried the same grace, the same quiet beauty that had once captivated him. But it wasn't just her presence that rattled him, it was the boy at her side. The child couldn't have been more than 10 years old, with sandy blonde hair and green eyes that looked almost exactly like his own. Michael's stomach churned as a realization started to form in his mind. The boy, he looked just like him. The resemblance was unmistakable, the shape of his face, the way his eyebrows arched, the slight smirk on his lips. This wasn't just any child. This was his son. There was no doubt in his mind. He felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. The world around him became a blur of noise and motion, but he couldn't focus on anything except Amber and the boy. His heart raced as he tried to process what he was seeing. Amber had a child, and that child was undoubtedly his. All those years he had spent running from his past, convincing himself that it was behind him, and now it was standing right in front of him. He took a step forward, his breath catching in his throat. He wanted to call out to her, to say something, but his voice wouldn't come. All he could do was stare, frozen in place, as the memories of the life he had left behind came rushing back like a tidal wave. He thought of the last time he had seen Amber, the cold, heartless note he had left on their kitchen table. He thought of all the times he had wondered what had become of her, but had never been brave enough to find out. And now, here she was just a few feet away from him, with a son who had grown up without him. The guilt hit him like a freight train. He felt his throat tighten as he watched the boy, his son, laugh and tug at Amber's hand. How long had she struggled? How had she coped with raising a child alone, while he had moved on to a new life, leaving her behind without a second thought? Michael's legs felt like lead as he took another step forward, determined to approach her. But just as he did, a crowd of passengers moved between them, temporarily blocking his view. By the time he pushed his way through, Amber and the boy had vanished from sight. Panic surged through him as he frantically scanned the terminal, looking for any sign of them. Where did they go? His mind raced as he tried to think clearly. This was a massive airport, and if he didn't find them soon, they could disappear into the sea of travelers, and he might never see them again. The thought was unbearable. He couldn't let them just slip away. Not now. Not after what he had just discovered. Ignoring the buzzing phone in his pocket, probably another message from Samantha, Michael took off in the direction he had last seen Amber. His heart pounded as he maneuvered through the crowd, his eyes darting from one face to another. How could he have been so blind? How could he have walked away without ever knowing the truth? As he searched, flashes of memory bombarded him. Amber's tearful face the night they last fought, the love they had once shared, the promises they had made to each other when they first got married. And now, standing on the other side of that broken promise, was a child, a boy who had lived 10 years without ever knowing his father. Finally, he spotted them. Amber was standing near a baggage claim carousel, looking through her phone, while the boy bounced on his heels beside her. Michael felt a surge of relief and anxiety all at once. He couldn't let this moment slip away. With hesitant steps, he began to approach them, but a sudden thought made him freeze. What would he say? How could he even begin to explain himself? Amber had every right to hate him for what he had done. He didn't deserve to just walk back into her life after all these years, not after abandoning her so coldly. And the boy, his son, what would he think of him? Could Michael even ask to be a part of his life now, after so much time had passed? Before he could gather his thoughts, a voice echoed through the terminal, the boarding call for his flight to New York. It jarred him back to reality. For a moment, he was torn. His professional life, his carefully constructed new identity, was on that flight. But Amber and his son were right here, a chance to reclaim what he had lost. He had a decision to make. Michael hesitated, his heart in his throat. But in that split second of indecision, the crowd surged again and he lost sight of them. This time, they were gone for good. Desperation clawed at him as he spun around, searching frantically, but it was too late. Amber had disappeared, leaving Michael standing alone in the middle of the airport, lost in a sea of strangers. Michael stood frozen in the bustling airport terminal, his heart still pounding in his chest. The weight of what he had just witnessed bore down on him like an anchor, pulling him into a sea of guilt and regret. Amber was here, in Chicago, the same city where he had walked out on her all those years ago, and the boy, there was no doubt in his mind now. That child was his son. He turned sharply, scanning the crowds once again, hoping for some sign of Amber and the boy, but they were gone. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, swallowed up by the swirling mass of travelers. His pulse raced as the gravity of the situation set in. He had a son, a 10-year-old boy he had never met, never even known about. And now, they were both gone, disappearing into the crowd like a cruel twist of fate. He felt a sickening churn in his stomach as the enormity of the situation overwhelmed him. How had he been so blind? How had he abandoned Amber without realizing what he was leaving behind? The phone in his pocket buzzed again. Samantha, no doubt. She was probably calling to remind him of his responsibilities, the dinner they had planned with potential investors, or maybe she was simply checking in. But right now, none of that mattered. Michael silenced the phone without looking at it. His priorities had shifted in the span of a heartbeat. His carefully curated life, built on success, ambition, and the pursuit of wealth, suddenly seemed insignificant. All that mattered now was finding Amber and the boy, his son. He couldn't let them disappear again. Without a second thought, Michael spun around and headed toward the airport's exit, his mind racing. He had to figure out where they were going. His breath quickened as he tried to come up with a plan. Should he wait here and hope they circled back? Should he ask around, try to get information from one of the airport staff? No, that wasn't enough. He needed to take real action. Pushing his way through the throngs of people, Michael made a beeline for the airport's parking garage. His car, a sleek black Mercedes, was parked on the 3rd level. But as he climbed into the driver's seat, he realized he had no idea where to start. The city of Chicago was massive. They could be heading anywhere, home, to visit family, or simply passing through. Frustration bubbled up inside him, and for a moment he slammed his fists against the steering wheel. How could he have let this happen? How could he have let them slip through his fingers? But then, as he sat there, breathing heavily in the silence of the car, an idea struck him. He had connections. He wasn't helpless. Over the years, as his business had grown, so had his network. He had hired private investigators in the past to dig up dirt on potential business rivals or track down information. This time, it wasn't business. It was personal. His fingers fumbled for his phone, and he quickly dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "David, it's Michael," he said as soon as the line connected. His voice was strained, and he could hear his heart pounding in his ears. "I need a favor." David, a former police detective turned private investigator, had worked for Michael several times before. He was the kind of man who could find anyone, anywhere, and he was discreet. Michael trusted him, at least as much as he trusted anyone in his life. "What's going on, Michael?" David's voice was calm, as always. "You sound like you've seen a ghost." "I might as well have," Michael muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Listen, I need you to track someone down for me. It's urgent. I just saw someone I haven't seen in years, and I need to know where they're going." "Who is it?" David asked, his tone professional now, no longer casual. "Amber," Michael said, his voice catching slightly. "Amber, my ex-wife, and she was with a boy. My son, I think." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Your son?" "I didn't know," Michael continued, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't know she had him. I just saw them at the airport. But they disappeared before I could talk to her. I need to know where she's going, where she lives, everything. I need to talk to her." David didn't hesitate. "I'll see what I can do. I assume she's still in Chicago." "I think so. I don't know. Just find her, David. Please." "I'll start right away," David replied, his voice steady. "But Michael, are you sure you're ready for this? It's been a long time. Things might be different now." Michael closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the headrest. He knew David was right. It had been 10 years. A lot could have changed. Amber had moved on with her life. She had to, given what he had done. And now there was this boy, his boy, caught in the middle of it all. But ready or not, Michael had no choice. He had to face his past. "I don't care," Michael said, his voice low but firm. "I need to know the truth." After hanging up the phone, Michael sat in the car for a long time, staring out at the airport. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft orange glow across the skyline. As the minutes ticked by, he couldn't stop thinking about the boy, Liam. He didn't know his name yet, but somehow, in his mind, the name Liam felt right. It was a name Amber had always liked. His son would be about 10 years old now, the same age as the boy he had seen at the airport. That realization sent a fresh wave of guilt crashing over him. 10 years. He had missed 10 years of his child's life. The first steps, the first words, the birthdays and school plays, all of it gone, lost because of the selfish decision he made a decade ago. As he sat there, his mind drifted back to those days, the days leading up to his departure. He remembered the arguments with Amber, the growing distance between them. He had blamed her for everything at the time, blamed her for holding him back, for not understanding his ambitions. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, he could see things more clearly. It hadn't been her fault. He had been young, reckless, and blinded by his own ego. The success he craved had always been just out of reach, and instead of working through their problems, he had run away. And now, 10 years later, he was living the life he had always wanted. Wealth, status, a new wife. Yet none of it mattered as much as the chance he had just missed. A knot of determination tightened in his chest. He wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through his fingers. He wasn't going to lose them again. That night, as Michael sat in his empty hotel room, waiting for David's call, he made a promise to himself. No matter what it took, no matter how painful or difficult it was, he would find Amber and his son. He would explain himself, and somehow he would make things right. The question that haunted him now was simple. Would they even want him back? Michael sat in his hotel room in downtown Chicago, staring blankly out the window. The city buzzed below, but the noise felt distant. His thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, regret, confusion, swirling around the image of Amber and the boy he was now certain was his son. He hadn't heard from David yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before his old friend would uncover the information he needed. As the minutes dragged on, Michael found himself drifting back in time, back to the moments that led him to this point. He could remember the exact day things started to change between him and Amber. It wasn't one explosive argument or one defining moment, but a gradual shift, a slow unraveling of the life they had built together. 10 years ago, they had been married for 5 years at that point, Michael's career had just started to take off. He was working long hours at a tech startup, pouring everything into making it a success. The stress was mounting, but so was his ambition. He wanted more money, more recognition, more power, and he was willing to sacrifice anything to get it. But as Michael's focus on work grew, his relationship with Amber began to deteriorate. She had always been his biggest supporter, encouraging him to chase his dreams, but she had her limits. The long hours, the cancelled dates, the nights spent alone waiting for him to come home. It all started to wear on her. And Michael? He didn't see it. Or rather, he refused to see it. He had convinced himself that he was doing it all for them. The long hours, the business trips, the stress. None of it mattered because it would all pay off in the end. He told himself that once he made it, things would get better. He and Amber would have the life they had always dreamed of. But what he didn't realize at the time was that by the time he reached his goal, it might be too late. The first real crack in their marriage came when Amber had suggested they take a trip together, a weekend getaway to reconnect. She had noticed the distance between them and wanted to fix it before it grew into something irreparable. "Michael, we need this," she had said one evening, her voice quiet but firm. They were sitting at the dinner table, though Michael was barely paying attention, his eyes fixed on the emails lighting up his phone. "I know, Em, but now isn't the right time," he had replied, his tone dismissive. "I've got too much on my plate right now. The investors are breathing down my neck, and we're this close to landing the funding we need. After this, we can go anywhere you want. I promise." Amber had looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You've been saying that for over a year, Michael." The silence that followed was heavy. Michael remembered how uncomfortable it had made him. He didn't want to talk about it, didn't want to admit that she was right, so he had done what he always did. He avoided the conversation, told her it would get better, and threw himself back into his work. But things didn't get better. The more success Michael found at work, the more distant he became from Amber. His nights were spent in the office, his weekends on business calls, and when he was home, he was there in body but not in spirit. Amber was left alone, her attempts to reach out to him growing more and more desperate. Then came Samantha. Michael hadn't planned for it to happen. He had met Samantha at a work event, one of those high society networking functions where everyone was more concerned with their status than with the actual conversations being had. She was the kind of woman who commanded attention the moment she walked into a room, confident, ambitious, and unapologetically driven. They had started talking about business, exchanging ideas and contacts, and before Michael knew it, they were spending more and more time together. At first, it was innocent, just two professionals working late into the night, bouncing ideas off each other, but soon it became more than that. Samantha was everything Michael thought he wanted at that point in his life. She understood the pressures of his work, encouraged his ambitions, and made him feel like the world was at his feet. In her, he saw a partner who wouldn't ask him to slow down, who wouldn't demand his time and attention the way Amber did. The affair had started slowly, almost imperceptibly, but before long, it consumed him. Michael had tried to ignore the guilt at first, telling himself that it wasn't serious, that it was just a temporary escape from the pressures of his life. But the more he indulged in his time with Samantha, the further he drifted from Amber. He still remembered the day Amber had confronted him about it. "Are you seeing someone else?" she had asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. It was late at night, and Michael had just returned from yet another business meeting. Amber had been waiting for him in the living room, her arms crossed, her face pale. Michael had been caught off guard, but instead of denying it, he had said nothing. His silence had been all the confirmation Amber needed. "I can't believe this," she had whispered, her voice breaking. After everything, Michael had tried to justify it, tried to tell her that it wasn't what she thought, but the words had fallen flat. Amber had looked at him with such hurt, such betrayal, that he couldn't bring himself to continue the lie. He had broken her heart that night, and he knew it. That was when their marriage had truly ended, even though the papers wouldn't come for months. Amber had retreated into herself after that, and Michael had let her. He had already checked out of the relationship, convinced that his future lay with Samantha, not with the woman he had once vowed to love for the rest of his life. The letter he left for Amber a few months later was the final nail in the coffin. He hadn't even had the decency to tell her in person that he was leaving. No, he had left her a cold, emotionless note on the kitchen table and walked out of her life without a second thought. It wasn't until years later, when his relationship with Samantha had cooled and the thrill of his success had faded, that the guilt started to creep in. But by then, it had seemed too late. He had convinced himself that Amber had moved on, that she was better off without him. So he buried the guilt, telling himself that his decision had been for the best. But now, sitting alone in that hotel room, with the knowledge that he had a son he never knew, Michael realized just how wrong he had been. Amber hadn't just moved on. She had been raising their child, his child, without him, while he had been off chasing wealth and success. The phone rang, pulling Michael out of his thoughts. His heart raced as he glanced at the screen. It was David. Michael answered quickly, his voice strained. "What did you find?" "I have an address," David replied. "Amber still lives in Chicago, South Side, near Hyde Park. The boy, Liam, I'm guessing, is enrolled in a local school. He's 10 years old, Michael. The timeline matches." Michael's breath caught in his throat. Liam. His son's name was Liam. "I'm sending you the details now," David continued. "But Michael, you need to be careful. It's been a long time. Amber might not be ready to see you." Michael closed his eyes, gripping the phone tightly. "I know," he whispered, "but I have to try." As he ended the call and received the message from David with the address, Michael felt a surge of determination. He wasn't going to let fear or guilt stop him. He had made mistakes, terrible ones, but now he had a chance to make things right. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could be part of Liam's future. Michael's mind raced as he sat behind the wheel of his Mercedes, staring blankly at the address David had sent him. It was real now. Everything he had run from for so long was waiting for him just a few miles away in a quiet neighborhood near Hyde Park. Amber and Liam, his son. The weight of the words still hadn't fully sunk in. For 10 years, he had lived a life detached from the consequences of his past. But now there was no escaping it. The streets of Chicago blurred past him as he drove, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter with every block. His heart pounded, and he could feel the tension rising in his chest. What was he even going to say when he saw Amber? How would he explain why he had left her, abandoned her and their child without so much as a word? A voice nagged in the back of his mind. What if she doesn't want to see you? What if it's too late? But Michael pushed those thoughts aside. He couldn't think like that. He needed to see them. He needed to see Liam, to understand what his life had been like without a father. Every second felt like a lifetime, and the closer he got to the address, the more the guilt gnawed at him. Pulling up in front of a modest 2-story house on a quiet residential street, Michael turned off the engine and stared at the house for a long moment. It was smaller than he expected, the kind of home built on stability rather than wealth. The garden was well maintained, and a swing set stood in the yard. Liam's, no doubt. Michael's heart ached at the sight. This was the life Amber had built for herself and their son. Without him, he sat there for what felt like hours, watching the house, but never making a move. He didn't know how to approach this. Dodging in unannounced felt wrong, but he couldn't just leave without at least trying to explain himself. Finally, he took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out. His legs felt heavy, his heart thudding against his ribs as he walked toward the front door. Every step was a struggle. His entire life, everything he had built, felt as though it was crumbling with each movement closer to the truth. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open. There she was, Amber. Time seemed to freeze as they locked eyes. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Amber's face, though older, was still just as beautiful as he remembered. But it wasn't the same face he had left behind. Her eyes held a guardedness, a strength that hadn't been there before. She stood taller, more sure of herself. There was no trace of the woman who had once begged him to stay. She looked at him with a mixture of shock and disbelief, her hand still on the doorknob, as if unsure whether to shut it in his face. "Michael." Her voice was quiet, laced with incredulity, as if she wasn't sure if he was real or just a ghost from her past. Michael swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Amber." The silence between them was suffocating. Amber's eyes flickered with confusion, anger, and something else. Something he couldn't quite place. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he possibly say to make up for the pain he had caused? How could he explain walking away from her, from their life, from their son? "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice sharper now, the shock quickly fading into a more familiar emotion, anger. Michael stammered, trying to find the right words, but there were no right words. "I saw you at the airport. I didn't know about Liam." Amber's face hardened at the mention of their son. Her eyes narrowed and her grip on the doorknob tightened. "You didn't know because you never cared enough to ask," she said, her voice cold, each word laced with bitterness. Michael flinched at the harshness in her tone, but he couldn't blame her. She had every right to be angry. He had abandoned her, left her to raise their son on her own without a single explanation. "I made a mistake," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "A terrible mistake. I never should have left." Amber crossed her arms, her expression still unreadable. "You left because you wanted to," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You made your choice, Michael. You chose your career, your new life, over us." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, and Michael struggled to breathe. She was right, of course. He had chosen ambition, wealth, and success over his family, and now he was paying the price. "I know," Michael said, his voice raw. "I know I don't deserve anything from you, but please, I need to see him. I need to know my son." For a moment, Amber didn't respond. She looked at him, really looked at him, as if weighing his words, deciding whether to trust him or shut him out for good. The silence stretched on, each second more agonizing than the last. Finally, she let out a breath and shook her head. "No," she said, her voice firm. "Liam doesn't know you. You don't get to just walk back into his life after 10 years and expect everything to be okay." Michael's heart sank. "Amber, please," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I know I don't deserve it, but I need to know him." Amber's eyes flashed with anger again. "Do you have any idea what it was like?" she snapped. "Do you even care?" "I had to raise him alone, Michael. Alone. You walked out without a word, without even bothering to check if I was okay. You didn't care then, so why should I believe you care now?" The guilt that had been gnawing at Michael's insides surged to the surface, threatening to drown him. He had imagined this confrontation 1,000 times, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of it. Seeing the pain in Amber's eyes, hearing the hurt in her voice, it was unbearable. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Amber shook her head, stepping back toward the door. "Sorry isn't enough," she said quietly. "It's too late, Michael. You don't get to be a part of his life now." Before Michael could respond, a voice from inside the house called out, "Mom, who is it?" Michael's breath caught in his throat. It was Liam. Amber turned toward the voice, her expression softening, but there was a trace of panic in her eyes. "It's nothing, sweetheart," she called back. "Go finish your homework." Michael took a step forward. "Please, Amber," he whispered. "Just let me talk to him." Amber hesitated, her hand tightening on the doorknob. For a brief moment, Michael thought she might relent, might give him the chance to see his son. But then she shook her head again, her expression hardening. "No," she said firmly, "you don't get to hurt him like you hurt me." And with that, she closed the door in his face. Michael stood there, staring at the closed door, his heart shattered. Amber's words echoed in his mind, each one a reminder of the pain he had caused. He had come this far, but it still wasn't enough. He wasn't part of their life, and maybe he never would be. But as he turned to leave, a single thought burned in his mind. He wasn't giving up. He had made too many mistakes already, but this was his chance to make things right. Michael stood outside Amber's house, the cool evening air brushing against his skin, but he barely felt it. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions, guilt, shame, regret, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The door had slammed shut in his face, cutting him off from the life he had abandoned so many years ago. Amber's words echoed in his mind, each one a reminder of the pain he had caused. You don't get to hurt him like you hurt me. Her rejection had been swift and absolute, but the worst part was that she was right. He didn't deserve to walk back into her life, or into Liam's, not after everything he had done. But standing there, staring at the closed door, Michael knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just walk away again, not this time. He had made too many mistakes, taken too many wrong turns, and for once in his life, he wanted to do the right thing, even if it was too late for Amber, even if Liam wanted nothing to do with him. He owed it to them to try. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes lingering on the house one last time before he turned and walked back to his car. His mind was racing, trying to figure out his next move. He couldn't force his way into their lives, not after everything that had happened, but he also couldn't just disappear without trying to understand the full picture. As he slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel, his phone buzzed again in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen, another message from Samantha. He hadn't replied to her texts or answered her calls all day, and it was clear from her tone that she was growing impatient. She was asking about the dinner party again, the one she had been planning for weeks with some high-profile investors. Normally, this would have been his priority, the success of their business, the next big deal. It was always at the forefront of his mind, but not anymore. Right now, all of that felt like noise. His life with Samantha, the corporate world they had built together, the material success that had once driven him, it all seemed hollow in the face of what he had just experienced. He silenced the phone and tossed it onto the passenger seat. For the first time in years, business could wait. He needed to know more about Liam. What kind of life had Amber built for him? How had she managed all these years on her own? And most importantly, what kind of boy was Liam? He was Michael's son, but he was a stranger to him. The thought sent a pang of guilt through his chest. As he drove through the quiet streets of Chicago, his mind wandered back to the past. He thought of the few times Amber had tried to reach out in the months after he left. She had sent him messages, asking to talk, pleading for some sort of closure, but he had ignored them all. He had convinced himself that leaving was the best thing for both of them, that he was giving Amber the freedom to move on and build a better life. But now, looking back, he could see how selfish that decision had been. Pulling up to a nearby park, Michael parked the car and sat in silence for a moment, his thoughts still spinning. He couldn't just show up at their house again. It was clear Amber wasn't ready for that, and he didn't want to push her. But maybe there was another way to get closer without overwhelming them. Suddenly, an idea began to form in his mind. He reached for his phone, quickly scrolling through his contacts until he found David's number. If anyone could help him navigate this delicate situation, it was David. The phone rang twice before David picked up. "Michael, did you talk to her?" Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I talked to her. Briefly. It didn't go well." "I figured as much," David replied. "It's been 10 years, man. You can't expect her to welcome you back with open arms." "I know," Michael said, his voice heavy, "but I can't just leave it like this. I need to know more about Liam, about their life. Amber won't let me near him right now, so I need your help." David paused on the other end of the line. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "I need to know about Liam's life, his school, his friends, what he's been through," Michael said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. I'm not asking you to spy on them, but I need some kind of insight. I need to understand him before I can even think about trying to be a part of his life." There was a long silence, and for a moment, Michael wasn't sure if David would agree. But then, David sighed. "I'll see what I can find out. But Michael, you need to be careful. This is a kid's life you're dealing with. You can't just barge in without thinking it through." "I know," Michael said quietly. "Believe me, I know." After hanging up the phone, Michael sat there for a long time, staring out at the park. He watched as families passed by, children playing on the swings and couples walking their dogs. It was a peaceful scene, but all Michael could think about was the life he had missed out on, the birthday parties, the school events, the quiet evenings at home. He had thrown it all away, and now he was left picking up the pieces, hoping there was still something left to salvage. Over the next few days, Michael waited anxiously for David's report. He tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. Samantha grew more impatient with each passing day, questioning his sudden distraction and lack of communication. He gave her vague excuses about needing space, but the truth was, his mind was consumed with thoughts of Liam and Amber. When David finally called, it was late in the evening. Michael had been pacing the floor of his hotel room, his nerves frayed from the waiting. He answered the phone on the first ring. "I've got something for you," David said, his voice businesslike as usual. "Liam's a smart kid. He's in the 5th grade at a local public school, does well academically, and plays soccer on the weekends. Amber's been raising him on her own, but from what I can gather, she's had some help from a guy named Ryan." Michael's chest tightened at the mention of another man. "Who's Ryan?" "Her boyfriend, from what I've found. They've been together for about 2 years. He's good with Liam, treats him like his own kid." The words hit Michael like a punch to the gut. Another man had stepped in and filled the role that Michael had abandoned. He had no right to be angry or jealous. He had left them after all. But the thought of another man raising his son stirred something deep inside him. "Ryan," Michael muttered, the name leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. "Does Liam know about me?" David hesitated. "It's hard to say. Amber's been careful. She doesn't talk about you much, if at all, from what I've gathered. As far as Liam's concerned, Ryan's been the only father figure in his life." Michael clenched his jaw, the weight of his mistakes crashing down on him all over again. He had expected Amber to move on, but hearing about Ryan made it painfully real. Another man had stepped into the life he had left behind and had become the father Liam needed. Michael sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, his mind spinning. He felt trapped by his past decisions, by the life he had chosen, and by the family he had abandoned. For years, he had convinced himself that leaving was the right thing to do, but now he could see how wrong he had been. Liam wasn't just some abstract concept anymore. He was a real boy, with a life and a father figure who wasn't Michael. "I have to meet him," Michael said quietly, more to himself than to David. "I have to find a way to meet him." "Michael," David's voice held a note of caution, "you need to think this through. Amber's not going to be happy if you go behind her back. And if Liam doesn't know who you are, this could blow up in your face." "I don't have a choice," Michael replied, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I've made too many mistakes already. I can't walk away again." Michael's thoughts spiraled as he hung up the phone with David. The weight of the information sat heavy on his shoulders. Ryan. The name echoed in his mind like a bitter reminder of everything he had given up. This stranger had been in Liam's life for 2 years, 2 years during which Michael had been absent, completely unaware of the life his son was living. Liam didn't even know who his real father was. And Ryan had been there, playing the role that Michael should have filled. He could feel the anger bubbling up inside him, but it wasn't directed at Ryan. It was directed at himself. Michael had been the one who left, the one who walked out on his family without a second thought. Ryan wasn't to blame for stepping in where Michael had failed, and yet the thought of another man raising his son, being there for the milestones Michael had missed, made his stomach churn. Sitting alone in his hotel room, Michael knew he had to tread carefully. He couldn't just charge back into their lives and expect everything to fall into place. Amber had made it clear she didn't want him anywhere near Liam. But Michael wasn't giving up. He had to find a way to reconnect with his son. He couldn't change the past, but maybe there was still hope for the future. The next morning, Michael parked outside the elementary school David had mentioned. He watched from his car as parents dropped off their children, his heart pounding as he scanned the crowd. He felt a deep sense of discomfort being here, knowing he was crossing a line, but he was desperate to see Liam, even if it was from a distance. The minutes dragged on, and just as Michael began to second-guess his decision, he saw him, Liam. The boy emerged from a grey SUV, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his light brown hair ruffled by the wind. Michael's breath caught in his throat. The resemblance was undeniable. Liam had his eyes, his hair, even the same way he carried himself. As Liam walked toward the school, laughing with a group of friends, Michael's heart swelled with a mix of pride and sadness. This was his son, a boy he had never met, never held, never spoken to. And here he was living his life, oblivious to the man watching him from across the street. For a moment, Michael considered getting out of the car, walking up to him, introducing himself, but the thought of Liam's reaction, confusion, anger, or worse, rejection, stopped him in his tracks. This wasn't the time, not yet. As Liam disappeared into the school, Michael leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. He had no idea how to approach this, no idea how to break through the walls Amber had built around their son. But one thing was certain: he couldn't leave things as they were. He had to talk to Amber again. He had to find a way to make her understand that he wasn't just passing through. He was here to stay, and he wasn't walking away this time. Later that evening, Michael found himself back in front of Amber's house, his nerves on edge. He wasn't sure if she would even open the door for him after their last confrontation, but he couldn't wait any longer. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed to see Liam again. He rang the doorbell and waited, his heart pounding in his chest. The seconds dragged on, and just as he was about to turn and leave, the door opened. Amber stood there, her expression guarded. She crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of him standing on her doorstep again. "What are you doing here, Michael?" she asked, her voice flat. Michael swallowed hard. "I need to talk to you, Amber, please." She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if checking to see if Liam was nearby. Then, with a sigh, she stepped aside and motioned for him to come in. Michael stepped into the house, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The living room was cozy, filled with the warmth of a family home, something he hadn't felt in years. Toys were scattered across the floor, and the smell of dinner lingered in the air. It was a stark contrast to the cold, sterile environment of his own life. Amber motioned for him to sit on the couch, and he did, feeling out of place in the home he should have been a part of. She sat down in a chair across from him, her arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. "You said all you needed to say last time," Amber began, her voice laced with frustration. "There's nothing else to discuss, Michael." "I need to see him," Michael said, his voice firm but pleading. "I need to know my son." Amber's eyes flashed with anger. "Liam doesn't know you. You don't get to just waltz back into our lives after 10 years and demand to see him." "I'm not demanding anything," Michael said quickly. "I know I don't have that right, but please, Amber, I'm asking you to give me a chance." "I made a mistake." "A mistake," Amber interrupted, her voice rising. "You walked out on us, Michael. You abandoned us without a word. That's more than a mistake. You don't get to undo that just because you've decided it's convenient for you now." Michael flinched at her words, guilt washing over him like a wave. I know I hurt you, and I hurt him. I'll never forgive myself for that. But I'm here now. I want to be a part of his life. I can't just walk away again." Amber stared at him for a long moment, her expression softening slightly, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. "It's not that simple, Michael. Liam has a life. He has people who love him, who have been there for him when you weren't." Ryan, Michael muttered, unable to hide the bitterness in his voice. Amber's eyes narrowed. Yes, Ryan. He's been more of a father to Liam than you ever were. Michael clenched his fists, fighting back the urge to lash out. He knew she was right, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. I'm not trying to replace him, Michael said, his voice tense. But I'm Liam's father. I deserve a chance to know him. Deserve, Amber repeated, shaking her head. You don't deserve anything, Michael. You chose your life. You chose to leave. You don't get to come back and act like you're entitled to be part of his life now. Michael's frustration bubbled to the surface, and he stood up, pacing the length of the room. I know I messed up, okay? I know I don't deserve it, but Liam deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know where he came from. Amber's face softened slightly, but she still looked wary. Liam knows who his father is, she said quietly. He knows the man who's been there for him every day. I'm not going to let you come in and confuse him, disrupt his life. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face her, his voice filled with desperation. I'm not here to disrupt anything. I just want a chance to explain myself, to let him know that I'm here for him now. Amber looked down at her hands, her expression torn. For a moment, Michael thought she might relent, but then she stood up and walked to the door, her back to him. I need time to think about it, she said quietly. This isn't just about you, Michael. It's about Liam. I need to do what's best for him. Michael nodded, his heart heavy. I understand. I'll wait. Amber opened the door, signaling the end of the conversation. Michael hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the door, feeling a mixture of hope and dread. He had made progress, but it was fragile. Everything depended on Amber's next move. As he stepped outside, the cool evening air hit him, and he took a deep breath. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but he knew one thing. He wasn't giving up. Not this time. The night after Michael left, Amber sat alone in the dimly lit living room, her thoughts swirling. The house was quiet now. Liam had finished his homework and was sound asleep in his room upstairs. But Amber couldn't rest. Michael's sudden reappearance had shaken her more than she cared to admit, and now she was left grappling with a decision she wasn't ready to make. For 10 years, Amber had built a life without him. She had learned to stand on her own, raise her son alone, and keep the memories of Michael buried deep in her past. But now, those memories were back, and they were threatening to unravel everything she had worked so hard to protect. Her thoughts shifted to Liam. She had done everything in her power to give him a stable, loving home. He was a happy kid, smart, kind, and full of life, and part of that stability had come from Ryan, the man who had been there for her when she needed someone most. Ryan had stepped into their lives when Liam was just 8 years old, and he had become a father figure to her son in ways Michael never had. The idea of disrupting that stability terrified Amber. She didn't want Liam's world turned upside down, and she didn't want him hurt by the man who had already caused them so much pain. But Michael's words echoed in her mind. Liam deserves to know the truth. Amber had always known that this moment might come, that one day Michael would show up and demand to see his son, but she had never expected it to happen like this, out of the blue, with no warning. And now she was faced with a choice: keep Liam's life as it was, safe and familiar, or allow Michael back in, risking everything she had fought so hard to protect. She sighed deeply, rubbing her temples as the weight of the decision pressed down on her. She wasn't sure if she could trust Michael. The man who had stood on her doorstep today wasn't the same man who had walked out on her all those years ago, but the pain of his betrayal was still fresh, still raw. Could he really be different now? Could he be the father Liam deserved? The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled Amber from her thoughts. She looked up to see Ryan standing at the bottom of the staircase, his brow furrowed in concern. He must have sensed something was wrong. After all these years, Ryan knew her better than anyone. "Hey," he said softly, walking over to the couch and sitting down beside her. "You've been quiet all night. What's going on?" Amber hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. There was no point in hiding it. Ryan needed to know. "Michael came by the house again," Ryan's face tightened slightly, but he didn't say anything. He had always been understanding when it came to Michael, never pushing her to talk about it, never judging her for the past. But she could see the tension in his posture now. "What did he want?" Ryan asked, his voice calm but cautious. "He wants to see Liam," Amber replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says he wants to be a part of his life." Ryan sat back, crossing his arms as he processed the information. His eyes searched Amber's face, trying to gauge how she was feeling about all of this. "And what do you think?" he asked carefully. Amber shook her head, her emotions swirling in confusion. "I don't know. I don't know." She looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. Ryan reached out and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You've done a great job raising Liam," he said softly. "You've given him everything he needs. But this is a big decision, Em, and whatever you decide, I'll be here for you." Amber met his eyes, grateful for his steady presence. Ryan had been her rock, the one who had helped her pick up the pieces after Michael left. He had been there for Liam too, in all the ways Michael hadn't. And yet, despite all of that, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that maybe, just maybe, Liam did deserve to know the man who had given him half of his DNA. "I'm just scared," Amber admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't want Liam to get hurt. And I don't know if I can trust Michael." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's understandable, but maybe this isn't about trusting Michael. Maybe it's about giving Liam a chance to know where he comes from. He's going to have questions someday. He deserves to know the truth." Amber swallowed hard, the lump in her throat making it difficult to speak. But what if Michael lets him down again? What if he walks away like he did before? Ryan leaned forward, his gaze steady and serious. "Then Liam will know the truth about who his father really is. But at least he'll know." Amber looked away, her mind swirling with doubts and fears. She didn't want to disrupt Liam's world. She didn't want to introduce more chaos into their lives. But Ryan was right. Liam was going to have questions one day. And Amber wasn't sure if she could keep pretending that Michael didn't exist. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. "But I'm not making any promises." Ryan nodded, his hand still resting on hers. "Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Just make sure it's what's best for Liam." Amber gave him a small, grateful smile, but her heart still felt heavy. She appreciated Ryan's support, but the decision weighed on her shoulders alone. She had to think about Liam, about what was best for him, not just what would protect her from the pain of the past. That night, as Amber lay in bed, her mind continued to race. She tossed and turned, her thoughts bouncing between the past and the present, between the life she had built and the life that had been shattered when Michael left. Sleep eluded her, and by the time the first rays of sunlight peeked through the curtains, she was still wide awake, staring at the ceiling, no closer to a decision than she had been the night before. The next morning, as she got Liam ready for school, she watched him carefully, wondering what he would think if he knew the truth. He was still so young, so innocent, and she wanted to protect that innocence for as long as possible. But she also knew that she couldn't protect him forever. As she dropped Liam off at school, she lingered for a moment, watching him as he joined his friends on the playground. He was laughing, carefree, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beyond his world. Amber's chest tightened with emotion. How could she risk taking that away from him? How could she risk letting Michael back in, only to have him hurt Liam the way he had hurt her? But as she drove away, her thoughts kept circling back to one thing: Liam deserves to know the truth. Later that day, Amber found herself standing outside the cafe where she had agreed to meet Michael. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this conversation, but she knew it had to happen. She needed to hear him out, needed to understand what he was really asking for. As she walked inside, she spotted him sitting at a table near the window, his expression tense and anxious. He looked up as she approached, and for a moment, their eyes met, and Amber saw a flicker of the man she had once loved, the man who had promised her forever, only to walk away when things got tough. She sat down across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. Michael looked like he hadn't slept either, the dark circles under his eyes betraying the same inner turmoil that had kept her up all night. "Thank you for meeting me," Michael said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. Amber nodded but said nothing. She wasn't here for pleasantries. She was here for answers. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything," Michael began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I'm asking anyway. I want to be a part of Liam's life." Amber stared at him for a long moment, her mind racing with everything she wanted to say. But instead of the anger she had expected to feel, what came out was something softer, something more vulnerable. "I need to know if you're serious," she said quietly. "If you're going to stick around this time." Michael's expression softened, and he nodded. I'm not going anywhere, Amber, I swear." Amber sat across from Michael in the small cafe, her heart pounding as his words hung in the air. "I'm not going anywhere." He had said it with such conviction, but she couldn't shake the fear that had built up over the years. Could she trust him? Was this really a new beginning, or was it just another mistake waiting to happen? For a moment, she looked down at the coffee cup in front of her, swirling the contents absent-mindedly, trying to gather her thoughts. The memory of the last time Michael had made promises to her flashed through her mind, promises that had been broken when he left. She wasn't the same person she had been back then, and she wasn't about to fall for empty words again. Not without a fight. "Michael," she began, her voice measured but firm, "I need you to understand something. This isn't just about you and me anymore. It's about Liam. And if you hurt him the way you hurt me, if you walk away again, I won't be able to forgive you, neither will he." Michael's face was a mixture of pain and determination. He leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table. "I know, Amber. I know I don't deserve your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I've changed. I'm not the man who left you all those years ago. I want to be there for Liam. I want to make up for the time I've lost." Amber's throat tightened at his words, but she kept her expression neutral. She had been strong for so long, and letting her guard down now felt like walking into a storm without an umbrella. She couldn't afford to be swept away by emotions. Liam was her priority, and she had to think about what was best for him. "You say you've changed," Amber said carefully, her eyes locking with his. "But how do I know you won't change again? You have no idea what it's been like, raising Liam on my own, trying to explain why his father wasn't there. You didn't see the questions in his eyes, the confusion, the hurt, and I can't let you come back into his life just to leave him all over again." Michael's gaze dropped to the table, and for a moment it seemed as if he was at a loss for words. When he looked back up, his eyes were filled with a vulnerability she hadn't seen in him before. "I don't expect you to believe me right away," he said softly, "but I'm here. I'm staying in Chicago for as long as it takes. I want to prove to you and to Liam that I'm serious. I can't change the past, but I can be here now." Amber's heart ached at the sincerity in his voice, but she couldn't let herself be swayed so easily. Too much was at stake. She sat back in her chair, crossing her arms, the familiar walls around her heart rising again. "What's different this time, Michael?" she asked, her tone more skeptical now. "Why now? Why are you suddenly so determined to be a part of Liam's life after all these years?" Michael hesitated for a moment, as if he was trying to find the right words. "When I saw you at the airport," he began slowly, "I realized that I've been running from my past for too long. I've been living a life that looks successful from the outside, but inside, it's empty. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone when I left, but I was wrong. I was selfish, and I regret it every day. Seeing you with Liam, it made me realize how much I've missed, and I can't keep running." Amber's breath caught in her throat, her emotions warring inside her. She had dreamed of hearing those words from Michael for years, but now that they were here, they felt bittersweet. She couldn't deny the pain he had caused her, the struggle she had faced raising Liam alone, but part of her, a small, fragile part, wanted to believe that he was telling the truth, that maybe, just maybe, he had changed. But trust wasn't something she could give easily anymore, especially not to Michael. "I don't know if I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to believe you, but I've spent too many years picking up the pieces of what you left behind." Michael leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight, but I'm asking you to let me try. Let me be there for Liam. Let me be the father he deserves." Amber shook her head, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "It's not that simple, Michael. Liam has a life, a stable life, with people who love him. Ryan's been there for him in ways you haven't. He's become a father figure to Liam. If I let you back into his life, I don't want to confuse him, or worse, hurt him." At the mention of Ryan, Michael's jaw clenched slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew this was part of the price he had to pay. He had walked away, and someone else had stepped in. But the thought of another man raising his son was still a bitter pill to swallow. "I'm not trying to replace Ryan," Michael said, his voice controlled but strained. "I know he's been there for Liam, but I'm his father, Amber. I deserve a chance to know him, to be a part of his life, and Liam deserves to know where he came from." Amber sat in silence, her mind racing. She knew Michael had a point. No matter how much she wanted to protect Liam from the potential pain of reconnecting with his father, she couldn't deny that Liam had the right to know the truth. And if she didn't give Michael a chance, would Liam one day blame her for keeping his father away? But the fear still lingered, the fear that Michael would disappoint Liam the way he had disappointed her, the fear that opening the door to the past would bring more hurt than healing. "Let me talk to him," Michael continued, his voice gentle now. "I'll take it slow, I won't overwhelm him. But please, Amber, don't shut me out. Don't shut him out from knowing who his real father is." Amber swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She looked down at her hands, unsure of what to say. Her mind was a jumble of conflicting thoughts. Part of her wanted to slam the door shut on this chapter of her life for good. But another part of her, the part that still held out hope for a better future for Liam, wanted to give Michael the chance he was asking for. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. "I need time, Michael. I need time to think about this." Michael nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." For the next few days, Amber was consumed by the decision she had to make. She watched Liam closely, her heart aching as she thought about what it would mean to introduce Michael into his life. Liam was happy, and she didn't want to disrupt that. But she also couldn't ignore the fact that he would eventually start asking questions about his father. What would she say then? She thought about her conversation with Ryan. He had been so understanding, so supportive, but she knew that letting Michael back into their lives would complicate things. Ryan had been a steady presence in Liam's life for the past 2 years, and she didn't want to undermine that. But Ryan wasn't Liam's biological father, and no matter how much he loved Liam, he couldn't answer the questions that only Michael could. One afternoon, as Amber picked Liam up from school, she watched him as he chatted animatedly with his friends, completely unaware of the storm brewing in her mind. He was such a bright, joyful boy, so full of life. She had worked so hard to protect that joy, to shield him from the pain that had once consumed her. But now, she wondered if she had been shielding him from something he needed to know. "Mom!" Liam's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She blinked and looked down at him, her heart tightening as she smiled. "Yeah, sweetie. Can we go to the park for a bit?" Liam asked, his face lighting up with excitement. "Ryan said he'd meet us there after work." Amber hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Sure, let's go." As they headed to the park, Amber's mind continued to race. She needed to make a decision soon. Liam was growing up, and the questions would come sooner rather than later. She had to figure out what was best for him, even if it meant letting go of the fear she had held on to for so long. Amber stood at the edge of the park, watching as Liam ran toward the swings, his face beaming with excitement. Ryan was supposed to meet them after work, but he hadn't arrived yet, and for a brief moment, Amber was grateful for the time alone to clear her thoughts. The sun was starting to set, casting a warm, golden glow over the trees, and the air was crisp with the onset of fall. But despite the beauty of the evening, her mind was a storm of emotions. Ever since Michael's reappearance, she hadn't been able to think about anything else. Her life, once so carefully constructed around stability and predictability, felt like it was teetering on the edge of something she couldn't control. And at the center of it all was Liam, the boy she had raised on her own, the boy whose world she wanted to protect more than anything. As she watched him play, her thoughts drifted back to the years after Michael had left. It had been the hardest time of her life, navigating the challenges of single motherhood with little support. Financially, things had been tight. She had worked 2 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, and the emotional toll had been even heavier. There had been nights when she cried herself to sleep, wondering how she would make it through another day. But somehow, she had managed. She had found strength she didn't know she had, and as the years passed, things slowly got better. She had found a steady job, one that allowed her to provide for Liam without working herself to the bone. She had made friends, built a support network, and most importantly, she had created a life where Liam was happy and safe. And then Ryan had come along. Ryan had been the breath of fresh air she hadn't realized she needed. He had been patient, kind, and understanding, never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. He had embraced Liam as his own, and over time, they had built a life together. For the first time in years, Amber had felt like things were finally falling into place. But now, with Michael back, everything felt uncertain again. She had spent so long trying to protect Liam from the pain of knowing his father had abandoned him. And now, that very man was asking to be a part of Liam's life. Could she trust him? Would letting him back in be the right decision, or would it only lead to more heartache? Amber sighed deeply, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She didn't know how to move forward. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Ryan approaching, a warm smile on his face. He jogged the last few steps toward her, his arms opening for a quick hug. Amber leaned into him, grateful for his presence. "Sorry I'm late," Ryan said, his voice easygoing as always. "Got stuck in traffic." "No worries," Amber replied, her smile faint, but Ryan didn't miss the tension in her posture. He pulled back slightly, searching her face. "Everything okay?" Amber hesitated for a moment, then nodded toward the park bench. "Can we sit for a minute?" Ryan's smile faded as he followed her to the bench, sensing that something was on her mind. They sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Liam's laughter echoed through the park as he played on the swings, oblivious to the conversation about to unfold. "Michael came to see me again," Amber said finally, her voice quiet. Ryan didn't react immediately, but she could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. He remained calm, though, as he always did. "And what did he say this time?" Amber sighed, running a hand through her hair. "He wants to be a part of Liam's life. He says he's changed, that he's not the same person who left us. He wants a chance to know his son." Ryan nodded slowly, taking it all in. His expression was thoughtful, but Amber could see the tightness in his jaw. "How do you feel about that?" "I don't know," Amber admitted, her voice tinged with frustration. "Part of me doesn't trust him. How could I? He walked out on us without a word, left me to raise Liam on my own. I don't know if he's capable of sticking around." Ryan turned to face her, his gaze steady. "And the other part of you?" Amber swallowed hard, her emotions raw. "The other part of me thinks maybe Liam deserves to know the truth. No matter how much I hate what Michael did, he's still Liam's father. And one day, Liam's going to have questions. I don't want to be the one keeping the answers from him." Ryan's eyes softened as he reached out to take her hand. "I get it, Amber. It's not an easy decision, but whatever you decide, I'm with you. You know that, right?" Amber squeezed his hand, grateful for his unwavering support. "I know. I don't want to hurt Liam." His life is so stable right now. He's happy. I'm afraid that letting Michael back in will mess everything up." Ryan leaned back on the bench, his gaze drifting to where Liam was still playing. "Liam's a strong kid. He's smart and he's resilient. Whatever happens, he'll get through it, and he'll have you, he'll have us." Amber smiled faintly, her heart warming at Ryan's words. He had been so good to her and Liam, stepping into a role he hadn't needed to fill but had taken on with love and commitment. She had no doubt that Ryan was a father to Liam in every sense of the word, even if not biologically. But she also knew that Liam's curiosity about his biological father would only grow with time. "I just wish I knew what the right thing to do was," Amber whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. Ryan turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes there isn't a right or wrong answer. You just have to follow your gut and do what you think is best for Liam. You've raised him for 10 years, Amber. You've always done what's best for him." Amber nodded, but the knot of anxiety in her chest remained. She knew that Ryan was right. There was no clear answer. She had to weigh the risks, the potential pain of letting Michael back into their lives, against the possibility of giving Liam a chance to know his real father. And as much as she wanted to protect Liam from the hurt that Michael had caused, she couldn't ignore the fact that Liam deserved to know the truth. "I'm going to talk to him," Amber said finally, her voice firmer now. "I'm going to give him a chance." Ryan didn't respond right away, but after a moment, he nodded. "Okay, but if he ever does anything to hurt you or Liam, I won't hold back." Amber smiled, appreciating Ryan's protectiveness. "I know." The next day, Amber called Michael and arranged to meet him again, this time at the park near Liam's school. She felt a mixture of nerves and resolve as she sat on the park bench, waiting for him to arrive. This was it, the moment when she would decide whether to let Michael back into their lives. When Michael finally arrived, he looked tense, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. He sat down beside her, keeping a respectful distance as if he knew this was her decision, not his. "I've thought a lot about what you said," Amber began, her voice steady, "and I've decided to give you a chance. But this isn't going to be easy, Michael. Liam doesn't know you, and I'm not going to let you hurt him. If you're serious about being a part of his life, you need to understand that this is going to take time." Michael nodded, relief flooding his expression. "I understand. I'll take it slow, whatever it takes." Amber took a deep breath, her heart heavy but resolute. "I'll tell Liam about you, but I want to be the one to explain everything to him first. We'll take it one step at a time." Michael's face softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Amber. I promise I won't let you down." Amber didn't respond right away. She wasn't ready to trust that promise yet, but she was ready to take the first step for Liam's sake. The decision weighed heavily on Amber in the days leading up to the conversation she knew she had to have with Liam. As much as she had prepared herself for this moment, the thought of actually sitting him down and telling him the truth about his father sent her heart racing. Liam was only 10 years old, and his world was so innocent, so free from the complicated emotions that had defined Amber's life for the past decade. But she couldn't keep the truth from him forever. Michael's reappearance had made that clear. One evening after dinner, Amber decided it was time. She had spent the entire day thinking about how to approach it, running through different scenarios in her mind. But no matter how she imagined the conversation going, she knew it would be difficult. Liam deserved the truth, but she had no idea how he would react. "Liam," Amber called softly from the living room. He was upstairs in his room, probably building another one of his Lego creations, something he loved to do in his free time. "Yeah, Mom?" came his voice from the top of the stairs. "Come down for a minute. I need to talk to you about something." There was a pause, then the sound of Liam's footsteps on the stairs as he made his way down to the living room. He appeared in the doorway, his face a little flushed from playing, his eyes bright with curiosity. "What's up?" he asked, plopping down onto the couch next to her. His energy was so pure, so untainted by the complexities of life. For a moment, Amber almost wished she could hold on to that innocence for him just a little longer, but she knew this was something he needed to hear. "Sweetie," Amber began, her voice gentle but steady, "I need to talk to you about something important. It's about your father." Liam's face immediately changed, his smile fading as he looked at her with confusion. "My dad," Amber nodded, her heart aching as she saw the questions forming in his eyes. "Yes, you've asked me about him before, and I know I haven't always given you clear answers, but now I think it's time you knew the truth." Liam sat up straighter, his curiosity quickly turning into concern. "The truth? What do you mean?" Amber took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now that it was happening, she felt like the ground was shifting beneath her. "Your father, Michael, he left when you were very little. It was just you and me after that. He didn't stay in touch, and for a long time, I didn't hear from him at all." Liam blinked, processing her words slowly. "He left. Why?" Amber's throat tightened, and she struggled to find the right words. "He made a choice, Liam. He thought he was doing what was best for him at the time, but it wasn't the right choice. He left us, and I had to raise you on my own." Liam's face crumpled slightly, the weight of the information settling in. "So, he didn't want to be with us?" The pain in his voice was like a knife to Amber's heart. She reached out and took his hand, her voice filled with emotion. "It wasn't that he didn't want to be with you, sweetie. He made mistakes. He wasn't ready to be a father back then, and it took him a long time to realize what he'd lost." Liam looked down at his lap, his fingers fidgeting as he processed the information. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Amber could see the wheels turning in his mind, trying to make sense of a situation that was far too complicated for a 10-year-old to understand fully. "Why are you telling me this now?" Liam asked, his voice quiet and uncertain. "Because," Amber hesitated, knowing this was the hardest part, "because your father, Michael, is back. He wants to see you, to get to know you." Liam's eyes snapped up to hers, wide with shock. "He's back? Like here, in Chicago?" Amber nodded, watching the confusion and disbelief play out on her son's face. "Yes, he's been in town for a little while now. He saw you and me at the airport, and he's been trying to talk to me ever since. He told me he wants to be a part of your life." Liam didn't respond right away. He seemed to retreat into himself, his thoughts swirling behind his eyes as he tried to process everything she was telling him. Amber waited patiently, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the boy she'd raised struggle with the emotions she'd been so afraid to unleash. "Does he want to meet me?" Liam finally asked, his voice small and tentative. Amber nodded again, her voice soft. "Yes, he does." Liam stared at the floor, his face a mixture of sadness, anger, and confusion. Why didn't he come before? Why did he wait so long? Amber swallowed hard, her own emotions bubbling to the surface. "I don't know, sweetie. I don't have all the answers, but I know that he regrets leaving, and he wants to make things right now. He wants to be a part of your life." Liam was quiet for a long time, his hands still fidgeting in his lap. Finally, he looked up at her, his voice trembling. "I don't know if I want to meet him." Amber's heart ached at the uncertainty in his voice, but she had expected this. She knew this would be overwhelming for him. "And that's okay," she said gently. "You don't have to decide right now. This is a lot to take in, and you have every right to feel whatever you're feeling. But I want you to know that I'll be here for you no matter what." Liam looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if he leaves again? The question hit Amber like a punch to the gut, but she kept her composure. "That's a fear I've had too," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But your father says he's different now. He says he's not going anywhere. And while I can't promise you anything, I can promise that I'll protect you. If he ever hurts you, I'll be right here." Liam looked at her for a long moment, his face full of doubt and confusion. He was trying to make sense of something that even adults struggled to understand, how someone could leave and then come back, asking for a second chance. "I don't know, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't know what to think." Amber nodded, understanding the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "That's okay, sweetheart. You don't have to make any decisions right now. I just wanted you to know the truth. And if you ever have questions, you can always talk to me." Liam didn't respond, but he leaned into her, resting his head on her shoulder. Amber wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, feeling the weight of the moment settle over them both. She could feel the uncertainty in his body, the tension in his small frame, but she also felt his need for comfort, for reassurance that no matter what happened, he wasn't alone. Over the next few days, Liam was quieter than usual. He still went to school, still played with his friends, but Amber could see that the conversation weighed heavily on him. She didn't push him to talk, giving him the space to process everything in his own time. She knew this was a huge adjustment for him, and she wanted to let him come to terms with it at his own pace. One afternoon, as they were sitting in the living room, Liam finally broke the silence. "Mom?" Amber looked up from her book, her heart skipping a beat. "Yeah, sweetie." Liam hesitated, then spoke in a soft voice. "Do you think I should meet him?" Amber set her book down and turned to face him fully. She could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the fear mixed with curiosity. "I think that's a decision only you can make," she said gently. "But if you want my opinion, I think it might be good for you to meet him, to see for yourself who he is." Liam was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I think I want to meet him." Amber felt a surge of emotions, relief, fear, hope, all tangled together. She smiled softly, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "We'll take it slow, okay? One step at a time." Liam nodded again, though the uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. A few days later, Amber called Michael and told him that Liam was ready to meet him. They arranged to meet at a park, a neutral place where Liam could feel comfortable. Amber was anxious, her nerves on edge as the day of the meeting approached. She knew how much was riding on this, how much it could change their lives. When the day finally came, Amber and Liam arrived at the park early. Liam was quiet, fidgeting nervously as they waited on a bench. Amber did her best to reassure him, but she could feel the tension in the air. Then, in the distance, she saw Michael approaching. He looked just as nervous as they were, his hands stuffed in his pockets, his eyes scanning the park until they landed on them. Amber felt her heart clench as she saw the mixture of hope and fear in his expression. Liam stiffened beside her, his eyes wide as he watched his father approach. "Is that him?" Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. Amber nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, that's him." Liam didn't say anything, but his grip on her hand tightened as Michael drew closer. When Michael finally reached them, he stopped a few feet away, his eyes locked on Liam. For a long moment, there was silence as father and son looked at each other for the first time. Michael's face was filled with emotion, relief, guilt, hope, all tangled together. He looked like a man who had been waiting for this moment for years, but was terrified of what it might bring. "Hi, Liam," Michael said softly, his voice trembling slightly. "I'm your dad." The air in the park felt thick with tension as Michael stood in front of his son for the first time. Liam's wide, uncertain eyes met his, and Michael struggled to steady himself. The moment he had been imagining for weeks, years even, was finally here, and it was far more overwhelming than he had anticipated. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. But he knew this wasn't about him. This was about Liam, the boy who had grown up without him, the boy whose world he was about to shake with his presence. Liam, on the other hand, sat stiffly on the park bench next to Amber. His small hand was tightly wrapped around hers, his knuckles white. He didn't say a word, just stared up at the man who called himself his father, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and confusion playing across his face. "Hi," Liam finally muttered, his voice barely audible. Michael swallowed the lump in his throat, crouching down to be at eye level with Liam. I've wanted to meet you for a long time." Liam didn't respond, his eyes darting briefly to his mother as if searching for reassurance. Amber gave him a small nod, her expression calm but watchful, and Liam turned his gaze back to Michael. The silence stretched on, awkward and tense. Michael's mind raced as he struggled to find the right words, words that wouldn't overwhelm Liam, but would show him how much he regretted being absent. But how could he explain 10 years of absence in just a few sentences? How could he convey the depth of his regret, his guilt, without frightening Liam? "I know this is a lot," Michael said softly, his voice trembling. "And I don't want to scare you or make you feel uncomfortable. I just wanted to be here, to meet you." Liam still didn't say anything. His hands were fidgeting in his lap now, a sign that he was nervous, unsure of how to respond. Michael glanced at Amber, who was watching the interaction closely but giving them space. He knew she was fiercely protective of Liam, and one wrong move on his part could ruin everything. "I know you have questions," Michael continued, his voice filled with a quiet sincerity, "and I'll answer them whenever you're ready. But right now, I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Liam's brow furrowed slightly, and for the first time, he spoke up. "Why didn't you come before?" Michael felt his chest tighten at the question he had been dreading. He knew this would come up, but hearing it from his own son, seeing the pain and confusion in Liam's eyes, made it all the more real. How could he explain his selfishness to a 10-year-old? How could he tell Liam that he had chosen his career, his ambition, over him? "I made a mistake," Michael said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "A big mistake. I thought I was doing what was best at the time, but I was wrong. I wasn't ready to be a father, and I ran away from it. But I've regretted it every day since." Liam's eyes narrowed, and he looked away, his small face twisted in thought. He seemed to be trying to make sense of what Michael was saying, but the concept of abandonment was too big for him to fully understand. Amber stayed quiet, letting the conversation unfold naturally, though Michael could sense her tension from where he stood. Liam spoke again, his voice hesitant. Didn't you miss me?" Michael's heart broke at the question. His breath caught in his throat, and he had to blink back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I did, every single day," he whispered, "but I was too scared to come back. I didn't know how, and that's on me, not on you." "You didn't do anything wrong." Liam shifted uncomfortably on the bench, his expression still a mixture of emotions he didn't fully understand. The weight of his father's words hung heavy in the air. Michael could see the confusion, the hurt, and maybe even a small flicker of hope in his son's eyes, but it would take time for those feelings to sort themselves out. Amber finally spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "Liam, you don't have to decide how you feel right now. This is a lot to take in, and it's okay if you're not sure. Your father understands that." Liam looked up at her, his grip on her hand loosening slightly as he nodded. I don't know what to think." Michael nodded in agreement, trying to keep his emotions in check. "That's okay. I don't expect you to understand everything right now. I just want to be here, to get to know you. We can take things slow." There was a long pause before Liam spoke again, his voice small and unsure. "What do you want to know about me?" Michael smiled softly, relief washing over him at the question. It was a small step, but it was something. "I'd like to know everything, but we can start with something simple," Michael said gently. "What do you like to do for fun?" Liam shrugged, still unsure of how to navigate the conversation. "I like to play soccer, and I build Legos sometimes." Michael's smile widened slightly. "Soccer, huh? I used to play a bit when I was your age. Maybe one day we can kick a ball around together." Liam's eyes flickered with interest, though he didn't respond. Michael didn't push it. He knew that this was only the beginning, and he didn't want to overwhelm Liam with too much too soon. They were both feeling their way through this, step by step. For the next half hour, Michael and Liam continued to talk, their conversations slow and tentative. Michael learned that Liam liked dinosaurs, that he loved chocolate ice cream, and that his favorite subject in school was science. It was small talk, but to Michael, it was everything. Each piece of information about Liam felt like a gift, a glimpse into the life he had missed. Amber watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy with conflicting emotions. Seeing Liam talk to Michael, seeing the small connection forming between them, was both heartbreaking and hopeful. She had spent so long protecting Liam from the pain of his father's absence, and now, here they were, tentatively building a bridge between the past and the future. As the sun began to set and the park started to empty, Michael knew it was time to wrap things up. He didn't want to push his luck, and he could see that Liam was starting to tire from the emotional weight of the conversation. "I should probably get going," Michael said softly, standing up from the bench. He looked at Liam, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and guilt. "Thank you for talking with me, Liam. I know this wasn't easy." Liam nodded, still unsure of how to feel, but there was no hostility in his expression, just uncertainty. "I'll see you again, okay?" Michael said gently. "We'll take things slow, one day at a time." Liam didn't respond, but he gave a small nod, his eyes drifting down to his shoes. Michael could tell the boy was exhausted from the emotional weight of the meeting, but he had handled it better than Michael could have ever hoped. Michael turned to Amber, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me this chance." Amber nodded, her face calm but unreadable. "We'll talk later," she said simply. With that, Michael turned and walked away, his heart pounding as he left the park. He had taken the first step, but he knew there was still a long road ahead. The connection with Liam had been fragile, tentative, but it was there. And now, all he could do was hope that with time, they could build something real. That night, after Liam had gone to bed, Amber sat alone in the living room, her thoughts racing. The meeting had gone better than she had expected, but the emotional toll on both her and Liam was undeniable. She wondered if she had made the right decision, if allowing Michael back into their lives was the right path for Liam. But as she thought about the look in Liam's eyes, the mixture of fear and curiosity, she knew that this was something he needed to explore. Ryan came in from work late that evening, and as he sat down beside her on the couch, he could see the exhaustion on her face. "How did it go?" he asked quietly. Amber leaned back, letting out a long sigh. "It was hard, but I think it went as well as it could have." Liam didn't say much, but he listened, and Michael was different. "He's trying, Ryan." Ryan nodded, reaching out to take her hand. "You did the right thing, Amber. This was something Liam needed. He'll figure out how he feels about it in time." Amber nodded, grateful for Ryan's unwavering support, but even as she tried to relax, the weight of the day still pressed down on her. The journey was far from over, and she knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, emotions, and decisions that could change everything. The days following Liam's first meeting with Michael were a whirlwind of emotions for everyone involved. For Amber, it felt like walking a tightrope, trying to balance the past with the present and keep her son's emotional well-being at the forefront of every decision she made. She spent most of her time worrying about how Liam was processing everything, constantly checking in with him, but also trying to give him space. She knew this would be a slow process, and she needed to let him come to terms with it in his own time. For Liam, the encounter with his father had left him confused. He was still trying to understand why his dad had been gone for so long, why he hadn't been a part of his life, and what it meant now that he was back. He hadn't spoken much about the meeting since it happened, but Amber could see the change in his demeanor. He was quieter, more thoughtful, and it broke her heart to see him wrestling with emotions far too big for a 10-year-old to carry. One evening, as Amber was preparing dinner, she heard a soft knock on the kitchen door. She turned to see Ryan standing there, his expression concerned. "How's Liam doing?" Ryan asked gently, leaning against the doorframe. Amber sighed, setting down the knife she had been using to chop vegetables. "He's processing. He hasn't said much since the meeting. I think he's just trying to figure it all out." Ryan walked over to her and placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "That's to be expected. It's a lot for him to take in." Amber nodded, her heart heavy. "I know. I just hate seeing him so confused. I don't want him to feel like his world is turning upside down." Ryan gave her a small, reassuring smile. He's a strong kid, Amber. He'll get through this, and you're doing everything you can to help him. Just give him time. Amber appreciated Ryan's constant support, but deep down, she still felt the weight of the decision she had made. Letting Michael back into their lives had been the right thing to do for Liam, but that didn't make it any easier. Every time she looked at her son, she could see the questions in his eyes, the uncertainty that had settled into his young mind. As she stood there in the kitchen, lost in thought, she heard Liam's footsteps approaching. He appeared in the doorway, looking small and vulnerable. His face was pensive, his brows furrowed as he clutched a book to his chest. "Mom?" Liam asked quietly. Amber turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "Yeah, sweetie?" Liam hesitated for a moment, then walked over to the kitchen table and sat down. "Can we talk?" Amber's stomach tightened. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure she was ready for it. "Of course," she said gently, taking a seat across from him. Ryan gave them space, stepping out of the room but staying nearby. Liam stared down at the table, his fingers tracing the edges of the book in his hands. For a moment, he didn't say anything, and Amber could feel the tension in the air. Is he going to stay?" Liam asked softly, not looking up. Amber's heart ached at the question. She had wondered the same thing herself, though she had been careful not to show Liam her doubts. She wanted to give him the hope that Michael could be a part of his life, but she also knew how fragile that hope was. "I think he wants to stay," Amber replied honestly. "He told me he's committed to being here for you, but Liam, I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'm always going to be here for you. You don't have to worry about anything changing between us." Liam nodded, though his expression remained conflicted. "I don't really know what to say to him. I don't even know him." "And that's okay," Amber said softly. "You're just starting to get to know him, and it's going to take time. You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time." Liam finally looked up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if I don't like him?" Amber's breath caught in her throat, but she kept her voice steady. "Then that's okay too. You're allowed to feel whatever you're feeling. This isn't easy, and no one expects you to know how you feel right away." Liam was quiet again, processing her words. Finally, he spoke in a small voice. "I just don't want him to leave again." Amber's heart broke at the vulnerability in his words. She reached across the table and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know, sweetie. I know. That's something I worry about too. But right now, he's here, and he's trying." Liam nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. He didn't say anything else, but Amber could tell that the conversation had helped, even if just a little. She gave him a reassuring smile before he excused himself to go back to his room. Later that night, as Amber lay in bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the conversation with Liam. The fear in his voice had struck a chord with her because it mirrored her own fears. As much as she wanted to believe that Michael had changed, part of her still feared that he would walk away again, leaving Liam heartbroken. She had spent so many years protecting her son from that very pain, and now, here they were, right on the edge of it. Ryan joined her in bed a little while later, and as soon as he saw the worry etched on her face, he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "You're thinking too much," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. Amber sighed, resting her head against his chest. I don't know how this is all going to play out, Ryan. I'm scared for Liam. I'm scared for what happens if Michael disappoints him." Ryan was silent for a moment, his hand gently stroking her arm. "I understand, but you're doing the best you can, and that's all you can do. Liam's strong, and he's got you and me. No matter what happens with Michael, he's going to be okay because he's got a solid foundation here." Amber nodded, though the worry still lingered. Ryan's words were comforting, but the uncertainty of the situation weighed heavily on her heart. Meanwhile, Michael was grappling with his own feelings of guilt and anxiety. The meeting with Liam had gone better than he had expected, but it had also left him with a deep sense of shame. Seeing the confusion and fear in Liam's eyes, had brought all of his past mistakes rushing back to the surface. He had missed so much, too much, and now he was trying to piece together a relationship with a boy who had every right to be angry with him. Sitting in his hotel room, Michael stared out the window, his mind replaying the conversation with Liam over and over again. He wished he could go back and do things differently. He wished he hadn't been so selfish all those years ago, abandoning Amber and their son for a life that had turned out to be hollow. But wishing didn't change the past. All he could do now was try to be there for Liam in the present. But as much as he wanted to believe he had changed, the fear of failure gnawed at him. What if he wasn't good enough? What if he couldn't be the father Liam needed him to be? Those questions haunted him as he lay awake at night, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something that could either heal or destroy the fragile connection he was trying to build. The next day, Michael reached out to Amber again, asking if they could arrange another meeting with Liam. He wanted to keep the momentum going, to show Liam that he was serious about being in his life. Amber agreed, though he could sense the caution in her voice. This time, they decided to meet at a nearby cafe, a quieter setting where they could talk more easily. Michael arrived early, his nerves jangling as he waited for Amber and Liam to arrive. He ordered coffee and sat by the window, watching the street anxiously. When they finally arrived, Liam seemed more relaxed than he had been during their first meeting, though Michael could still see the nervous energy in his posture. Amber gave Michael a small nod, and they all sat down at the table together. For a while, the conversation was light, focused on small talk about school and soccer. Michael didn't push for anything deeper, wanting to give Liam time to warm up to him. He noticed that Liam was still guarded, but there were moments, brief flashes, where he could see a glimmer of curiosity in his son's eyes. At one point during the conversation, Liam asked about Michael's life, where he lived, what he did for work. It was the first time Liam had shown real interest in Michael, and it took Michael by surprise. "I live in New York now," Michael explained, his voice careful as he navigated the question. "I run a business there, but I'm staying here in Chicago for a while. I want to spend more time with you." Liam didn't respond immediately, but he seemed to take in the information thoughtfully. For the first time, Michael felt a small sense of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that evening, after their second meeting, Amber sat down with Liam again to check in on how he was feeling. She could see that he was still processing everything, but there was something different this time, a small shift in his demeanor. "How are you feeling about today?" Amber asked gently, sitting beside him on the couch. Liam shrugged, his eyes thoughtful. "It was okay. I'm still not sure about everything, but I guess he seems nice." Amber smiled softly, her heart warming at his words. It wasn't a declaration of acceptance, but it was a step in the right direction. "That's good, sweetie. You don't have to be sure right away. Just take it one day at a time." Liam nodded, leaning into her. "Do you think he's really going to stay this time?" Amber hesitated for a moment, then kissed the top of his head. "I hope so." The weeks following Liam's second meeting with Michael were filled with a delicate balance of emotions. Michael was trying to ease his way into Liam's life without pushing too hard, while Liam was still unsure how he felt about this man who had suddenly appeared, claiming to be his father. Amber, caught in the middle, was doing her best to maintain a sense of normalcy for her son while grappling with her own fears about what might happen next. Meanwhile, Ryan, though supportive as always, couldn't help but feel the growing tension in the air. Michael had been staying in Chicago, keeping his word about being there for Liam, but as the days turned into weeks, Ryan began to feel more and more like an outsider in his own home. He knew that Amber's decision to let Michael back into Liam's life was the right one for their son, but it didn't stop the knot of jealousy and uncertainty that had been tightening in his chest. One evening, as Ryan arrived home from work, he found Amber sitting on the couch, her face drawn with exhaustion. She looked up as he walked in, giving him a tired smile, but Ryan could see the stress weighing heavily on her. "Rough day?" he asked gently, setting his bag down and walking over to sit beside her. Amber sighed, leaning into him as he wrapped his arm around her. It's just everything. Liam's been so quiet lately. I know he's still trying to figure out how he feels about Michael, but it's hard to see him struggling like this. Ryan nodded, understanding the weight of her concerns. Have they been spending more time together? Yeah, Amber replied. Michael's been taking him out for short visits, getting ice cream, playing soccer at the park. Liam doesn't say much about it when he gets home, but I think he's slowly starting to open up. I just wish I could make this easier for him. Ryan kissed the top of her head, his heart aching for both her and Liam. You're doing everything you can, Em. Liam's going to figure this out in his own time. He's lucky to have you guiding him through it. Amber smiled softly at his words, but Ryan could see the worry that still lingered in her eyes. He wanted to say more, to reassure her, but deep down, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that had been gnawing at him ever since Michael had returned. As much as he tried to push it aside, the reality was that Michael's presence was changing things, and Ryan wasn't sure where he fit into the picture anymore. For Liam, the slow process of getting to know Michael continued. They had started meeting regularly, once or twice a week, and Michael had been careful not to overwhelm his son. Their conversations were still mostly light, revolving around soccer, school, and Liam's favorite books. But there were moments when the weight of their shared history would hang between them, unspoken but palpable. One afternoon, as they sat on a park bench after playing a game of soccer, Michael turned to Liam with a soft smile. "You're getting pretty good," Michael said, his voice filled with genuine pride. "You've got a great kick." Liam shrugged, though there was a small glimmer of pride in his eyes. "I practice a lot," Michael nodded, watching his son closely. "I can see that. Maybe one day you'll play on a team." Liam didn't respond right away, his gaze drifting to the field where other kids were playing. "Maybe." Michael hesitated, unsure of whether to bring up the topic that had been on his mind for weeks. He didn't want to scare Liam off, but he also felt that it was time to start addressing the elephant in the room, their shared past. "Liam," Michael began carefully, "I know this hasn't been easy for you, getting to know me after all this time. And I just want you to know that I understand if you're still feeling unsure about everything." Liam glanced up at him, his expression guarded. "It's just weird," he admitted quietly. "I don't really know you." Michael nodded, his heart heavy with guilt. "I know, and that's my fault. I wasn't there for you when I should have been, but I'm here now, and I want to get to know you better. And I want you to get to know me too." Liam shifted on the bench, his fingers fidgeting in his lap. What if you leave again?" Michael's breath caught in his throat, the question hitting him harder than he expected. He had been dreading this moment, knowing that Liam's biggest fear, one he had every right to feel, was that Michael would walk away again. "I'm not going to leave," Michael said firmly, his voice filled with emotion. "I made that mistake once, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but I'm not going anywhere this time. I'm here for you, Liam, for as long as you want me to be." Liam looked down, his face a mixture of emotions. He didn't respond, but Michael could see that the boy was struggling to believe him, and Michael couldn't blame him. Trust was something that had to be earned, and Michael knew he had a long way to go before he could prove himself worthy of Liam's trust. Back at home, Amber had noticed that Ryan was becoming more distant. He was still kind and supportive, but there was a tension between them that hadn't been there before. She could feel the unspoken weight of his concerns pressing down on their relationship, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they had to talk about it. One evening, after Liam had gone to bed, Amber sat down with Ryan in the living room, determined to address the growing distance between them. "Ryan, we need to talk," Amber said softly, her voice laced with concern. Ryan glanced up from the book he had been reading, his expression guarded. "About what?" Amber sighed, sitting down beside him. "About us. About how things have been since Michael came back." Ryan didn't respond right away, his jaw tightening slightly as he set the book aside. "I'm not sure what you want me to say, Amber. I just feel like there's this tension between us," Amber said gently. "Like you're pulling away." and I don't want that to happen." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his face troubled. "It's not that I'm pulling away, it's just hard, seeing Michael back in the picture. I know he's Liam's father, and I know this is important for Liam, but I can't help feeling like I'm losing my place in all of this." Amber's heart ached at his words. She reached out to take his hand, squeezing it gently. "You're not losing your place, Ryan. You've been Liam's father in every way that matters for the past 2 years. That's not going to change." Ryan looked down at their intertwined hands, his expression conflicted. "But it is changing, Amber. Michael's back, and no matter how you look at it, that changes things. Liam's getting to know his real dad now, and I don't know where I fit into that." Amber's chest tightened with emotion. She had been so focused on helping Liam navigate his feelings about Michael that she hadn't fully considered how this was affecting Ryan. "Ryan, you've been there for Liam in ways that Michael never was. That doesn't just go away because Michael is back. Liam loves you, and he's always going to need you in his life." Ryan let out a deep sigh, rubbing his temples. "I just don't want to feel like I'm being pushed out. I love Liam, Amber. He's like my own son." Amber's eyes filled with tears as she listened to Ryan's words. She could hear the vulnerability in his voice, the fear of being replaced by a man who had only recently decided to step back into his son's life. And while Amber knew that Michael had every right to get to know Liam, she also knew that Ryan had earned his place in their family. "You're not being pushed out," Amber said firmly, her voice shaking with emotion. "Liam needs you, and I need you. You're part of this family, Ryan. That's not going to change." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. Finally, he let out a slow breath and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I just don't want to lose you both." Amber buried her face in his chest, her heart aching with the weight of the situation. She understood Ryan's fears, and she knew that this was a delicate balancing act, one that could easily tip in the wrong direction if they weren't careful. "You won't," she whispered. "We'll figure this out. Together." Meanwhile, Michael was trying to navigate his own complicated emotions. Every time he spent time with Liam, he felt the bond between them slowly starting to form. But he also knew that trust wasn't something that would come easily. He had hurt Liam by being absent, and it would take more than a few soccer games and ice cream outings to make up for that. One evening, after another meeting with Liam, Michael found himself back at his hotel room, staring at his phone. He had missed several calls from Samantha, his wife, and the guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't told her about Liam yet. He hadn't told her that he was staying in Chicago longer than expected. The truth was, Michael was avoiding the inevitable conversation with Samantha. He knew that once he told her about Liam, everything would change. Samantha had always been ambitious, focused on her career and their business, and he wasn't sure how she would react to the fact that he had a 10-year-old son who was now becoming a central part of his life. With a sigh, Michael dialed her number, his heart heavy with dread. He knew he couldn't avoid this conversation forever. As the phone rang, Michael closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come. As Michael sat in his hotel room, phone pressed to his ear, the ringing seemed to echo in the silence. He knew the call he was making would change everything. For weeks, he had avoided telling Samantha about Liam, rationalizing that he needed time to figure things out. But now, there was no turning back. The truth had to come out, and he braced himself for the storm that was about to hit. Finally, Samantha's voice cut through the tension. "Michael, where have you been?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration. "I've been calling you for days. Is everything okay? You said this trip would only take a week." Michael closed his eyes, letting out a slow breath. "Sam, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the conversation. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Samantha's tone shifted, now edged with concern. "What's going on?" Michael leaned forward, rubbing his temples as he prepared to explain the tangled mess of his past and present. "I'm still in Chicago," he began carefully, his words measured. "And there's something I need to tell you about, something I've been dealing with." Samantha didn't respond immediately, but Michael could sense her tension rising. "Michael, what are you talking about? Why are you still in Chicago?" He swallowed hard, his throat tight. "It's about my past. Before I met you." There was another long silence, and Michael could hear Samantha's breathing over the phone. He knew she was putting the pieces together, but he also knew that nothing could prepare her for what he was about to say. "I have a son," Michael said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name is Liam. He's 10 years old. And I left him and his mother years ago." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Michael waited, his heart pounding. As Samantha absorbed the shock of his confession, he could feel the air between them shift, as if the ground beneath their relationship was cracking wide open. "Excuse me." Samantha's voice was sharp, cold. "You what?" Michael squeezed his eyes shut, guilt washing over him like a tidal wave. "It was before I met you. I made a terrible mistake, Sam. I walked out on them, on Amber and Liam, but I'm trying to make it right now. That's why I've been in Chicago. I've been seeing Liam." Samantha let out a harsh, bitter laugh, disbelief and anger mixing in her voice. "You have a son, and you didn't think to tell me this. You've been hiding this from me the whole time we've been married." "I didn't hide it," Michael said quickly, though he knew how hollow the words sounded. I wasn't ready to deal with it. I was scared, Sam. I didn't know how to tell you or how to face what I'd done." Samantha's voice cut through him like a knife. "So, instead of telling me, you just disappear for weeks to deal with it. And now you expect me to what? Just accept that you have a son and move on?" Michael's head dropped into his hands, the weight of his mistakes crushing him. "I know this is a lot. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. But I didn't want to lie to you anymore. I need to be honest." Samantha's anger simmered, her voice shaking with fury. "You lied to me from the moment we met. You made me believe that your past was something we could leave behind. But you've been hiding this massive secret, this child, and now you're trying to make it right after 10 years. How am I supposed to trust you, Michael?" He could feel his marriage slipping through his fingers, but Michael didn't know how to stop it. Everything he had built with Samantha was crumbling, and the truth about Liam had shattered the foundation of their relationship. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I know I should have told you earlier. I should have dealt with this a long time ago. But I didn't, and now I'm trying to fix it." Samantha's voice was icy, the anger now giving way to something deeper. Betrayal. "Fix it? You think you can just fix this? You've been lying to me for years, Michael. What else haven't you told me? How can I ever believe a word you say again?" Michael's throat tightened as he realized how deeply he had hurt her. The woman he had built a life with, the woman who had trusted him, now saw him as a stranger. And the truth was, he wasn't sure he could ever repair the damage he had done. "I didn't want to hurt you," Michael said, his voice pleading. "I love you, Sam. I don't want to lose you." But Samantha's next words were a dagger to his heart. "You already have." While Michael's world was unraveling, Amber was dealing with the fallout of her own decisions. She had allowed Michael back into Liam's life, but every day she wondered if she had made the right choice. Liam was still distant, still processing the complicated emotions of having his father back, and Amber couldn't shake the feeling that Michael's presence was causing more confusion than clarity for their son. One evening, after putting Liam to bed, Amber sat down with a glass of wine, staring blankly at the television as her mind raced. The house was quiet, but her thoughts were anything but. Ryan entered the living room, his face tired from a long day at work. He had been supportive throughout the entire process, but Amber could see the cracks starting to form. The tension between them was growing, and she knew that something had to give. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, sitting down beside her. Amber sighed, her fingers tightening around the wine glass. "I don't know, I'm exhausted, Ryan. I feel like I'm constantly second-guessing myself." Ryan reached out and took her hand, his thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. "You're doing the best you can, Em. No one could expect more." Amber nodded, but the worry in her chest didn't ease. I just keep thinking, what if I've made a mistake? What if letting Michael back into Liam's life is only going to hurt him more? Ryan was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. Liam needs to know his father. That's not a mistake, but I think you're scared of what might happen if Michael doesn't stay. Amber's heart tightened, her eyes filling with unshed tears. I'm terrified, and I don't know if I can handle it if he walks away again. Ryan pulled her into his arms, holding her close as her emotions spilled over. You're not in this alone, he whispered. I'm here. No matter what happens with Michael, you've got me. And Liam does too. Amber buried her face in Ryan's chest, her tears soaking into his shirt as she let herself be vulnerable for the first time in weeks. Ryan's steady presence had been her rock throughout all of this, and now, as the weight of her decisions pressed down on her, she clung to him for comfort. I don't want to lose you, Amber whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Ryan pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands. You won't, he said firmly. I'm not going anywhere. But even as Ryan's words brought her some solace, Amber couldn't shake the feeling that everything was unraveling around her. The delicate balance she had been trying to maintain between her past and her present, between Michael and Ryan, felt more fragile than ever. And no matter how hard she tried to keep it all together, she knew that something had to give. As the days passed, Michael's situation with Samantha deteriorated further. She had returned to New York, furious and heartbroken, leaving Michael to deal with the mess he had made in Chicago. He called her repeatedly, trying to salvage their marriage, but Samantha's anger was too raw, her trust too shattered. The more he tried to explain, the more distant she became. Michael found himself torn between two worlds, the life he had built with Samantha, which was now falling apart, and the new relationship he was trying to forge with Liam. Each day, he wondered if he could truly have both, or if he would have to choose between them. One afternoon, as he sat in a coffee shop waiting to meet Liam for one of their visits, Michael's phone buzzed. It was a message from Samantha. I need space. Don't call me again until you figure out what you want. Michael stared at the message, his chest tightening with a mixture of guilt and despair. He had wanted to fix things with Samantha, to somehow find a way to balance his past and his present. But now, it seemed that the life he had built with her was slipping through his fingers, and he wasn't sure if he could ever get it back. As Liam entered the coffee shop, his face lighting up when he spotted his father, Michael forced a smile. He shoved his phone into his pocket, determined to focus on the one thing that still felt right, his connection with his son. But even as they sat down together, the weight of Michael's crumbling marriage hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the choices he had made were still unraveling, piece by piece. Michael's world continued to unravel after Samantha's devastating message. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, to make the right decisions for his future. But now, for the first time in his life, everything was spiraling out of his control. His marriage was hanging by a thread, and no amount of apologizing seemed to repair the damage. On the other hand, his relationship with Liam was fragile, slowly starting to grow but still fraught with uncertainty. Sitting alone in his hotel room, Michael felt the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like never before. The guilt over abandoning Amber and Liam, the shame of lying to Samantha, and the fear of losing both his son and his wife collided in his mind, leaving him overwhelmed. He knew he couldn't continue to live between these two worlds for much longer. One evening, after a long day with Liam, Michael decided to call Samantha one last time. He had to talk to her, had to explain himself better than he had before. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail, and Michael hesitated before leaving a message. Sam, it's me. I know you don't want to talk right now, but I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. And I know I've done a terrible job explaining everything. This is all so complicated, but I love you. Please, just call me when you're ready. I need you in my life. He ended the call, staring at the phone for a few more moments before tossing it onto the bed. As much as he wanted to believe that Samantha would eventually forgive him, the silence between them was deafening, and the longer she stayed away, the more Michael began to fear that he had already lost her. Meanwhile, back at home, Amber was dealing with her own internal struggles. Ryan had been her rock throughout this entire process, but Amber could sense the growing distance between them. He hadn't said much about Michael recently, but there was an underlying tension in the air whenever his name came up. Ryan was trying to be supportive, but Amber knew that the situation with Michael was taking its toll on their relationship. One evening, as Amber and Ryan sat down for dinner after putting Liam to bed, the tension finally reached its breaking point. "Ryan, we need to talk," Amber said softly, her voice breaking the quiet that had settled over the room. Ryan looked up from his plate, his brow furrowing slightly. "About what?" Amber hesitated for a moment, her heart heavy. She didn't want to hurt him, but she knew they couldn't keep avoiding the conversation that had been looming over them for weeks. "About us. About everything that's been going on since Michael came back," Ryan sighed, setting his fork down and leaning back in his chair. Yeah, I figured this was coming." Amber's chest tightened as she watched the tension play out on his face. "I feel like we've been drifting apart, Ryan. I hate it. I know this whole thing with Michael has been hard, but I don't want it to come between us." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his expression conflicted. "Amber, it's not just about Michael coming back. It's about everything that comes with him. I know you're doing what's best for Liam, and I support that, but honestly, it's hard to watch you go through this, to see you torn between your past and your present." Amber's heart ached at his words. She had always known that Ryan was struggling with Michael's return, but hearing him voice his feelings so plainly made it all the more real. "I'm not torn, Ryan. I'm not choosing between you and Michael. I'm choosing what's best for Liam." Ryan nodded, but the hurt in his eyes was clear. "I get that, I do, but it feels like you're pulling away from me, even if you don't realize it. I've been here every day, trying to be the man that Liam needs and the partner you need, but now it feels like I'm losing both of you." Amber's throat tightened as tears threatened to spill over. She hated seeing the pain in Ryan's eyes, knowing that her decisions had put a strain on their relationship. "You're not losing us, Ryan. You've been Liam's father in every way that matters, and that's not going to change. But Michael is his biological father, and Liam deserves the chance to know him." "I know that," Ryan said, his voice quiet but firm. "But where does that leave me? Am I just supposed to step aside and watch as Michael fills the role I've been trying so hard to fill for the past 2 years? Amber shook her head, reaching across the table to take his hand. "No, Ryan. You're not stepping aside. Liam loves you, and you're a part of his life, our life. But I need you to trust me when I say that letting Michael be a part of Liam's life is what's best for him. It's not about replacing you. It's about giving Liam the chance to know where he comes from." Ryan looked down at their joined hands, his face filled with uncertainty. "I'm trying, Em, but it's hard. I feel like I'm competing with this ghost of your past." Amber's heart broke at his words. She could see how much this was weighing on him, and she knew that no matter how much she reassured him, the situation with Michael was still going to be a point of tension. "I don't want you to feel like that," Amber whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you, Ryan. You're the man who's been there for me and for Liam. That's not going to change." Ryan's eyes met hers, and for a moment they sat in silence, the weight of their emotions hanging in the air. Finally, Ryan squeezed her hand, his voice soft but filled with determination. "I love you too, Em, and I'm not going anywhere. I just need to know that we're in this together." Amber nodded, relief flooding through her as she leaned forward to kiss him. We're in this together." As Michael's relationship with Samantha continued to deteriorate, his bond with Liam slowly began to strengthen. Each time they met, Liam seemed a little more comfortable, a little more open. They still talked mostly about light topics, school, soccer, and books, but Michael could sense that Liam was starting to trust him more. And while it was a slow process, Michael was grateful for every small step forward. One afternoon, Michael took Liam out for ice cream after school. They sat at a small table near the window, the sun shining through the glass as they ate. "So, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?" Michael asked, trying to keep the conversation light. Liam thought for a moment before replying, "Mint chocolate chip. What's yours?" "Rocky Road," Michael said with a grin. "It's got a little bit of everything." Liam nodded, taking a bite of his ice cream. There was a brief pause before he spoke again, his voice more hesitant this time. Do you miss New York?" Michael looked at his son, surprised by the question. It was the first time Liam had asked anything about Michael's life outside of Chicago. "Sometimes," Michael admitted, "but right now being here with you is more important." Liam didn't say anything in response, but there was a small shift in his posture, as if the answer had reassured him in some way. Michael could see the walls Liam had built around himself slowly starting to come down, brick by brick. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Michael hope. As they walked back to Amber's house after their ice cream outing, Liam was quieter than usual. Michael didn't press him to talk, knowing that his son was still processing everything, but as they reached the front door, Liam stopped, turning to face his father. "Are you going to stay?" Liam asked, his voice filled with the same vulnerability he had shown during their first meeting. Michael's heart tightened as he crouched down to meet Liam at eye level. "Yes, Liam, I'm staying. I'm not going anywhere." Liam searched his father's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Okay," Michael smiled, the small but meaningful exchange filling him with hope for the future. As much as he had messed up in the past, he was determined to do everything in his power to be there for Liam now. Later that evening, Amber sat down with Liam to talk about how things were going with Michael. She wanted to make sure that Liam felt comfortable with the situation and that he knew he could talk to her about anything. "How are you feeling about spending time with your dad?" Amber asked gently, sitting beside Liam on the couch. Liam shrugged, his face thoughtful. "It's okay, he's nice, but it's still kind of weird." Amber nodded, understanding the mixed emotions her son was feeling. "That's normal. It's a big change, and it's okay to feel weird about it." Liam hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "Do you think he'll leave again?" Amber's chest tightened at the question. She had been dreading this moment, knowing that Liam's biggest fear was the possibility of Michael walking away again. "I don't think he will," she said carefully. "He's told me that he's staying, and I believe him. But I want you to know that no matter what happens, you've always got me and Ryan. We're not going anywhere." Liam nodded slowly, his face still filled with uncertainty. But Amber could see that he was trying to trust in the new reality they were building, even if it was hard. "I'm here for you, sweetie," Amber said softly, pulling him into a hug. "We're going to get through this together." Michael sat in the quiet of his hotel room, staring blankly at the ceiling. Samantha's words still echoed in his mind, cutting deep. "I need space. Don't call me again until you figure out what you want." He hadn't heard from her since that message, and as the days turned into weeks, the reality that he might lose her weighed heavily on him. His life in New York, the one he had built with Samantha, felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by his focus on rebuilding his relationship with Liam. But the question lingered in his mind. Could he really balance both worlds, or had his past mistakes finally caught up with him in a way that was irreparable? His phone vibrated on the bedside table, pulling him out of his thoughts. For a moment, he hoped it was Samantha, but when he checked the screen, he saw it was Amber. His heart raced slightly as he answered, uncertain of what news she might have. "Hey, Amber," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Hi, Michael," Amber responded, her tone calm but firm. "I just wanted to talk about Liam. He mentioned that you two have been spending more time together, and I wanted to make sure he's doing okay." Michael felt a rush of relief. His time with Liam had been going well, and he was eager to prove to Amber that he was serious about staying involved in his son's life. "Yeah, we've been meeting up regularly. He's opening up more. It's slow, but I think we're starting to connect." Amber paused, as if weighing her next words. That's good. I want him to have a relationship with you, Michael. But I also want to make sure you understand how important this is. He's starting to trust you, and if you walk away again, it'll crush him. Michael's chest tightened at the thought. I'm not going anywhere, Amber. I swear. I know I've made mistakes, but I'm trying to be the father he deserves. Amber's voice softened, but there was still a trace of hesitation. I believe you're trying, Michael, but you need to know that Liam is fragile right now. He's still figuring out how he feels about everything, and I need you to be patient with him. I will, Michael promised, his voice filled with determination. I won't let him down again. Amber let out a sigh, and there was a brief moment of silence before she spoke again. Ryan and I have been talking a lot about how to handle this, and, well, things have been difficult between us. I'm doing my best to balance everything, but I'm worried about Liam and Ryan. Michael swallowed hard, the mention of Ryan bringing a familiar tension to his chest. He hadn't wanted to cause problems for Amber and Ryan, but he knew that his presence in Liam's life had complicated things for them. I don't want to make things harder for you, Amber. I know this isn't easy. It's not your fault, Amber replied quickly, though her voice carried the weight of her own struggles. But we're all trying to navigate this, and I need you to understand how much is at stake. Michael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I do, and I'm committed to being here for Liam, no matter what. After a few more minutes of conversation, Amber ended the call, leaving Michael alone once again with his thoughts. He had promised himself, and Amber, that he wouldn't walk away this time. But with Samantha pulling away and his past mistakes hanging over him like a shadow, Michael couldn't help but wonder how long he could keep everything from falling apart. A few days later, Michael took Liam to a soccer game in the park. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the park was bustling with activity. Parents sat on the sidelines, cheering as their kids raced across the field, and Michael found himself wishing he had been there for moments like this in the past. As they sat together on the grass, waiting for the game to start, Michael glanced over at Liam, who was lacing up his soccer shoes. The boy looked more at ease than he had during their earlier meetings, and Michael felt a flicker of hope. The walls Liam had built around himself were slowly starting to come down, and Michael was determined not to let anything jeopardize that progress. "Are you excited for the game?" Michael asked, keeping his tone light. Liam nodded, his face focused on his task. "Yeah, we're playing a tough team today, but I think we can win," Michael smiled, leaning back on his hands. "I bet you will. You've been practicing a lot." Liam looked up at him, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm getting better at passing. Coach says I have a good eye for the game." Michael's chest swelled with pride. It was such a small moment, but hearing Liam talk about his skills, seeing the confidence in his eyes, meant the world to him. "That's great, Liam. I can't wait to see you play." As the game began, Michael found himself cheering alongside the other parents, his heart pounding with excitement every time Liam got near the ball. Watching his son on the field, seeing the joy and determination in his face, made Michael realize just how much he had missed. But it also fueled his resolve to be there for every moment from now on. While Michael and Liam were building their relationship, Samantha's silence loomed large over Michael's life. He had texted her several times, but each message went unanswered. As the days stretched on, he knew he couldn't wait forever for her to decide. He needed to know where they stood. Finally, after nearly 2 weeks of silence, Michael received an email from Samantha. His heart raced as he opened it, his eyes scanning the message with growing dread. "Michael, I've had time to think about everything, and I'm still hurt and angry about what you kept from me. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, and I need time to figure out what that means for us. I won't make any decisions right now, but I need space. For now, I'm staying in New York. I suggest you focus on figuring out what kind of father you want to be, because that's the one part of this you can't walk away from. I need time to decide what's next for us." Samantha Michael stared at the screen, his heart sinking. Samantha's words were measured, but the underlying message was clear. She wasn't sure if their marriage could survive this, and she was right. He had failed her by not being honest from the start. He had hidden the most important part of his past, and now the life they had built together was slipping away. For the first time, Michael truly faced the possibility that Samantha might never forgive him, that he might lose her for good. And the worst part was, he didn't know if he deserved her forgiveness. At home, Amber was still trying to navigate the tension between her and Ryan. They had managed to patch things up after their heart-to-heart, but the strain of balancing Michael's return and their relationship was still present. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Ryan turned to her, his expression serious. "Amber, I've been thinking, maybe we should all sit down and talk. You, me, and Michael. I feel like we're trying to deal with all of this in pieces, but we haven't really talked about it together." Amber raised an eyebrow, surprised by the suggestion. "You want to talk to Michael? About what?" Ryan shrugged, though there was a hint of frustration in his voice. "About where we all stand, about what this is going to look like moving forward. I've been doing my best to support you and Liam, but I feel like we're all just circling each other, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I need to know what Michael's intentions are, how he plans to be involved in Liam's life, and where that leaves me." Amber's heart sank at the thought of Ryan and Michael sitting down together. She knew it was bound to happen eventually, but the idea of facing all of their unresolved issues head-on made her stomach churn. Still, she understood where Ryan was coming from. He had been patient, but he needed clarity. "Okay," Amber said slowly. "We can sit down and talk. I think it's a good idea." Ryan nodded, though Amber could see the tension in his posture. He was trying to be calm and collected, but she knew this conversation wouldn't be easy for any of them. As the weekend approached, Michael received a call from Amber asking him to come over for dinner. "Ryan and I think it's time we all talked," she said carefully, "about everything. I think it's important for Liam and for all of us to figure out where we go from here." Michael agreed, though the thought of sitting down with both Amber and Ryan filled him with a sense of unease. He knew Ryan had been a father figure to Liam for the past 2 years, and while Michael respected that, he also felt a deep desire to reclaim his role as Liam's father. The lines between the past and the present were blurring, and Michael knew that this conversation would determine the future for all of them. The day of the dinner arrived, and as Michael pulled up to Amber's house, he took a deep breath. He wasn't just walking into a conversation, he was walking into the heart of everything he had been trying to rebuild. The stakes had never felt higher. As Michael pulled up to Amber's house, his chest tightened with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Tonight wasn't just another dinner, it was the moment of reckoning where everything, his relationship with Liam, his role in Amber's life, and the delicate balance between him and Ryan, would be laid bare. He took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel for a few moments before getting out of the car. The cool evening air hit him as he walked up to the front door, steeling himself for what was to come. Amber opened the door before he had a chance to knock. She gave him a small, tentative smile. "Come in." Michael stepped inside, the familiar warmth of the home hitting him instantly. He hadn't been in this house since before Liam was born, but it still carried an air of nostalgia. Memories of his life with Amber flickered through his mind, but he quickly pushed them aside. This wasn't about the past. This was about Liam's future. As he entered the living room, Michael's eyes fell on Ryan, who was sitting on the couch, his face calm but guarded. Liam was nowhere to be seen, which didn't surprise Michael. This conversation wasn't for him. "Ryan," Michael said, nodding in greeting. Ryan gave a curt nod in return. "Michael," the tension between them was palpable, but both men were trying to keep things civil. For now, Amber motioned for them to sit down, her face showing signs of stress. She had been dreading this conversation just as much as Michael had, if not more, but it had to happen. They couldn't keep moving forward without clearing the air. "Thank you for coming, Michael," Amber began, her voice steady but cautious. "We thought it would be a good idea to sit down and talk about..." Everything. Michael nodded, sitting down in the armchair across from Ryan. He noticed the way Ryan's body tensed slightly, as if preparing for a confrontation. Michael wasn't here to fight, but he knew Ryan had his own perspective on the situation, one that likely didn't align with Michael's. "I agree," Michael said, trying to sound calm. "I think we all need to be on the same page, for Liam's sake." Amber sat down next to Ryan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Liam's been doing better since you've been spending time with him, Michael. He's starting to open up more, and I can see that he's trying to figure out where you fit into his life." Michael's heart warmed at her words, but the sense of relief was quickly overshadowed by the gravity of what still needed to be addressed. "But," Amber continued, her eyes flickering between Michael and Ryan, "we need to talk about how we're going to move forward. Liam's relationship with you is still new, and we don't want to overwhelm him. At the same time, Ryan has been a father figure to Liam for the past 2 years, and that's something we need to acknowledge." Michael glanced at Ryan, feeling the weight of those words. He knew that Ryan had stepped into Liam's life during his absence, and as much as it pained him, he couldn't deny that Ryan had played a crucial role in raising his son. "I understand that," Michael said carefully, his gaze locking with Ryan's. "And I respect the fact that you've been there for Liam, but I'm his father. I want to be involved in his life, not just as someone who visits occasionally, but as someone who's really there for him." Ryan's jaw tightened slightly, but he kept his voice measured. "I've been there for Liam in every way that matters. I've been at every soccer game, helped with every school project, tucked him in at night when he's scared. I'm not trying to erase the fact that you're his biological father, Michael, but I need to know how you plan to fit into his life without disrupting the stability he already has." Michael appreciated Ryan's calm approach, but the words stung. He knew Ryan was right. He hadn't been there for the day-to-day moments, but he couldn't let that define the future. "I'm not trying to disrupt anything," Michael said, his voice firm. "I want to be a part of Liam's life in a way that supports what he already has, but I also want him to know that I'm his father. I know I can't undo the past, but I'm here now, and I plan to stay." Amber's eyes flicked between the two men, her tension palpable. She had hoped for a more straightforward conversation, but she knew that emotions were high and that the conversation would inevitably get complicated. "I think the most important thing," Amber said, interjecting before the tension could escalate further, "is that we all work together for Liam's sake. He needs consistency, and he needs to know that he can rely on all of us. That includes you, Michael, but it also includes Ryan. Liam sees him as a father figure, and we can't take that away from him." Michael's heart clenched. As much as he wanted to assert his role as Liam's father, he couldn't ignore the bond that had formed between Liam and Ryan. He had to tread carefully, for Liam's sake. "I don't want to take that away," Michael said, his voice quieter now. "I just want to find a way to be in his life without causing him more confusion." Ryan leaned forward slightly, his gaze locked on Michael. "Then let's be clear about what that looks like. I don't want Liam to feel like he has to choose between us. He shouldn't have to, but we need to set boundaries. He's still a kid, and if we're not careful, this situation could really mess with his head." Michael nodded, understanding the gravity of what Ryan was saying. He didn't want Liam to feel torn, and he certainly didn't want to be the cause of any emotional turmoil. "I agree," Michael said, his tone sincere. "I don't want him to feel like he has to choose. But I want him to know that I'm here for him consistently. I don't want to be just an occasional presence." Amber shifted in her seat, clearly trying to keep the conversation productive. "We all want what's best for Liam, and I think the best way to do that is to keep open communication. We need to work together, and that means being clear about our roles in Liam's life." Ryan's expression softened slightly, though the tension between him and Michael was still palpable. "I can agree with that," he said, though there was still a hint of caution in his voice. For a moment, the three of them sat in silence, the weight of the conversation hanging heavily in the air. There were no easy answers, no perfect solutions, but they all knew that they had to find a way to move forward for Liam's sake. Later that night, after the tense dinner had ended and Michael had left, Amber sat with Ryan in the quiet of their living room. The confrontation had gone better than she had expected, but it was clear that there was still a long road ahead. The dynamics between Michael and Ryan were complicated, and finding the right balance was going to take time. "You handled that well," Amber said softly, leaning into Ryan on the couch. Ryan let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't easy, but I get where he's coming from. I just want to make sure we're doing what's best for Liam." Amber nodded, her thoughts drifting to her son. Liam had been doing better recently, but she knew that the situation with Michael still weighed heavily on him. She just hoped they could navigate this without causing him more pain. "We'll figure it out," Amber said, though there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. Ryan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "Yeah, we will." For the next few weeks, things began to settle into a new normal. Michael continued to spend time with Liam, slowly building a stronger relationship with his son. The tension between him and Ryan remained, but they were making an effort to keep things civil for Liam's sake. Liam, for his part, seemed to be adjusting. He was still quiet at times, still processing everything, but he no longer looked at Michael with the same wariness he had in the beginning. There were even moments of genuine connection between them. Small but significant signs that trust was slowly being built. One afternoon, as Michael and Liam were sitting together after a soccer game, Liam turned to his father, his face thoughtful. "Do you think we could hang out more?" Liam asked, his voice tentative. Michael's heart swelled with emotion. It was the first time Liam had asked to spend more time with him, and the significance of the moment wasn't lost on him. "Of course," Michael said, smiling warmly. "I'd love that." Liam smiled back, a shy but genuine expression that filled Michael with hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start to something real. Weeks passed, and the fragile peace between Michael, Amber, and Ryan held. Each of them was careful to keep things civil for Liam's sake, though the tension still simmered beneath the surface, especially between the two men. Michael continued to spend time with his son, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. But while Liam's trust in his father was slowly being rebuilt, the uncertainty about Samantha's silence weighed heavily on Michael's mind. He hadn't heard from her in weeks, and the longer the silence stretched, the more he feared what her final decision would be. On a bright Saturday morning, Michael sat in a park with Liam, watching as his son played with a soccer ball. It had become their routine, spending time together in quiet moments like this. The connection between them, once fragile and hesitant, had solidified into something more real. For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of belonging in Liam's life. As Liam kicked the ball around, Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. His heart skipped a beat when he saw Samantha's name on the screen. This was the call he had been waiting for, and dreading. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Samantha?" There was a pause on the other end, and then her voice came through, calm but distant. "Michael, I've made a decision." Michael's stomach twisted. He had been preparing himself for this moment, but hearing the finality in her tone made his heart race. "What have you decided?" Samantha sighed softly. "I'm not coming back to Chicago. I need to focus on my life in New York. And I think it's best if we take some time apart. I can't just pretend that everything is fine after what you've kept from me. I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again." Michael's throat tightened. He had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier to hear. "So, is this the end?" he asked, his voice low and thick with emotion. "I don't know," Samantha admitted. "I need space, Michael. I can't make any promises about the future right now. I just need to figure out who I am outside of all of this." Michael closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a heavy blanket. He had known that his decision to reconnect with Liam would come with consequences, but losing Samantha still felt like a punch to the gut. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for everything, Sam." I never wanted to hurt you." There was another long pause before Samantha spoke again, her voice softer now. "I know you didn't, but that doesn't change what happened. You need to focus on being a father to Liam right now, and I need to focus on myself. Maybe one day things will be different, but for now, this is goodbye." Michael's heart ached as the call ended. He sat there in the park for a few moments, staring at his phone, feeling the finality of her decisions sink in. The life he had built with Samantha was over, at least for now, and all he had left was the fragile hope of rebuilding a relationship with his son. Liam ran over, breathless and smiling, completely unaware of the turmoil inside his father. "Dad, did you see that goal?" Michael forced a smile, his heart swelling with both pride and sadness. "I did, buddy. That was amazing." Liam grinned and kicked the ball again, running back toward the field. Michael watched him go, his chest tight with emotion. He had lost Samantha, but he couldn't lose Liam. That much was certain. That evening, Michael sat alone in his hotel room, thinking about the life he had lost. He had been so focused on reconnecting with Liam that he hadn't fully processed the fact that his marriage to Samantha was over. The silence in the room felt oppressive, a reminder of everything he had sacrificed and the uncertainty that lay ahead. But as much as he mourned the loss of his relationship with Samantha, he knew that he couldn't dwell on it forever. Liam needed him, and Michael was determined not to fail him again. He would put everything he had into being a good father, even if the rest of his life was falling apart. Over the next few days, Michael threw himself into spending time with Liam. They went to soccer games, visited museums, and spent long afternoons talking about everything from school to soccer to the latest video games. Liam's walls were coming down more and more, and Michael could see the change in his son's eyes. The boy, who had once been hesitant and guarded, was now opening up, slowly but surely. One afternoon, as they sat in a cafe together, Liam looked up at Michael, his face serious. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Michael nodded, his heart racing slightly. "Of course, anything." Liam hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you think you'll ever leave again?" The question hit Michael like a freight train. He had been waiting for it, dreading it. But now that it was here, he knew there was only one answer he could give. He leaned forward, looking his son directly in the eyes. "No, Liam, I'm not leaving. I promise you that." Liam studied his father's face for a long moment, as if trying to gauge the sincerity of his words. Finally, he nodded, his expression softening. "Okay." Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. At the same time, Amber was dealing with her own inner turmoil. The confrontation between Michael and Ryan had gone better than she had expected, but the tension still lingered. Ryan had been patient and understanding, but she could sense that he was struggling with the changes in their family dynamic. And as much as she tried to reassure him, Amber knew that things between them would never be the same. One evening, as they sat together in the living room after Liam had gone to bed, Ryan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Amber, I've been thinking." Amber's heart skipped a beat, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "What is it?" Ryan took a deep breath, his brow furrowing slightly. "I think it's time for me to take a step back." Amber's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Ryan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I love you, and I love Liam, but I think Michael needs to be the one to step up now. I've been here for Liam, but he's getting to know his real dad now. And I don't want to confuse him or make him feel like he has to choose between us." Amber's throat tightened with emotion. "Ryan, you don't have to step back. Liam loves you. You're part of this family." "I know," Ryan said softly, "but I think it's time for me to let Michael take the lead. It's what Liam needs right now." Amber felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to Ryan's words. She knew he was right, but that didn't make it any easier. Ryan had been a constant presence in Liam's life, and the thought of him stepping back felt like losing a part of their family. "But what about us?" Amber whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan's eyes softened as he reached out to take her hand. "We'll figure it out," I'm not going anywhere, Amber, but right now, I think it's best for Liam if Michael takes the lead. Amber nodded, though her heart ached at the thought of Ryan stepping back. She understood his reasoning, but the idea of navigating this new reality without him at the forefront of Liam's life was difficult to process. As the days passed, the shift in their family dynamic became more apparent. Ryan continued to be supportive, but he took a quieter role in Liam's life, allowing Michael to take on more responsibility. Liam, for his part, seemed to adjust well to the changes. His relationship with his father was growing stronger, and for the first time in his young life, he seemed to be at peace with the fact that Michael was here to stay. But even as things began to settle into a new normal, Amber couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. The tension between Michael and Ryan might have eased, but her own feelings were more complicated. She loved Ryan, but the return of Michael into her life had stirred up emotions she hadn't expected. She found herself thinking more and more about the past, about the life she and Michael had once shared, and the possibility of what might have been. It wasn't something she could admit to herself easily, but as the days passed, the questions lingered in her mind. Could she really move forward with Ryan, knowing that Michael was now such a central part of their lives? Or was she still holding on to the idea of the family she had once imagined, even after all these years? The summer air was thick with warmth as Michael sat on a bench in the park, watching Liam kick a soccer ball around. It had been several months since he had fully stepped into his role as Liam's father, and though the path had been difficult, there was a calmness in his heart that hadn't existed before. His life with Samantha was officially over, the final papers signed and filed. The silence between them, though painful, had become something he accepted. His focus was now solely on Liam, on being the father he should have been from the start. As Liam dribbled the ball toward him, Michael couldn't help but smile. His son had changed so much in the past few months. The boy who had once looked at him with uncertainty and doubt now saw him as someone he could rely on, someone who would always be there. "Dad, are you watching?" Liam called out, his voice filled with excitement. Michael nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Of course, I am. Show me what you've got." Liam grinned and kicked the ball with precision, sending it soaring into the small goal they had set up earlier. He turned back to his father, beaming with pride. For Michael, this was everything he had wanted, a connection with his son, built on trust, love, and a shared sense of joy. As Liam ran back toward him, Michael stood up and ruffled his son's hair. "You're getting pretty good at this," he said, his tone filled with warmth. "I've been practicing," Liam said proudly, his eyes shining. Michael couldn't help but feel a surge of gratitude for this second chance. The bond they had formed was still new, but it was real, and it was only going to grow stronger. At home, things had also shifted in subtle but significant ways. Ryan had kept his promise to step back, allowing Michael to take the lead in Liam's life. While the decision had been painful for him, it was clear that Ryan had done it out of love for both Amber and Liam. He was still very much a part of their lives, but his role had changed. Instead of being the primary father figure, he was now the steady presence in the background, there for support, but no longer at the center of Liam's world. One evening, as Ryan sat with Amber in their living room, he turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "I've been thinking about everything," he began quietly, "about how things have changed." Amber looked at him, her heart tightening slightly. She had sensed that this conversation was coming, but hearing the weight in Ryan's voice made it feel all the more real. "What do you mean?" she asked, though she already had an idea. Ryan let out a sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I know I said I'd step back, and I have, but the truth is, I don't know where I fit into all of this anymore. Liam's relationship with Michael is growing, and I'm glad for that. But I feel like an outsider in this family now." Amber's chest tightened. She'd been trying to juggle so many things, her relationship with Michael, her commitment to Liam, and her love for Ryan. But hearing Ryan's words, she realized that something had been slipping through the cracks. "Ryan, you're not an outsider," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "You're still a part of this family." Ryan smiled sadly, his eyes filled with emotion. I know you care about me, Amber, and I care about you, but things have changed between us, and I think we both know it. Amber's throat tightened with emotion. She had been avoiding this truth for weeks, trying to hold on to the idea that everything could go back to the way it was. But deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. Michael's return had changed things, not just for Liam, but for all of them. I don't want to lose you, Amber whispered, her voice trembling. Ryan squeezed her hand gently. You're not losing me, but maybe it's time for us to figure out what's next, for both of us. Amber's heart ached at the thought of losing Ryan, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Their relationship had been built on love, but the changes in their lives had made it difficult to hold on to that love in the same way. And as much as she didn't want to admit it, a part of her was still tied to Michael, a connection that she hadn't fully let go of, even after all these years. The next day, Michael came by to pick up Liam for their usual Saturday outing. As he waited in the living room, Ryan entered the room, his expression calm but serious. Michael, Ryan began, standing across from him. Can we talk for a minute? Michael looked up, sensing the weight in Ryan's tone. Sure, he said, setting down the cup of coffee Amber had offered him. Ryan sat down, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused. I just want to be clear about something. I've stepped back because I think it's what's best for Liam. He needs to get to know you, and I'm glad that's happening. But I also want to make sure you're in this for the long haul. Michael met his gaze, understanding the seriousness of what Ryan was saying. I'm not going anywhere, Ryan. I'm here for Liam. Ryan nodded, though his expression remained cautious. Good, because he's been hurt before, and I don't want to see him go through that again. Michael's chest tightened at the reminder of his past mistakes, but he appreciated Ryan's honesty. I won't hurt him again, Michael said firmly. I made that mistake once, and I'll never make it again. Ryan studied him for a moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. That's all I needed to hear. With that, the tension between them eased slightly. The conversation, though brief, had cleared the air in a way that hadn't been done before. Ryan had made his peace with the situation, and Michael had accepted the responsibility of being Liam's father, not just in words, but in action. As the months passed, the new normal began to settle into place. Liam's relationship with Michael continued to grow, while Ryan remained a constant, supportive presence in the background. The awkwardness between the two men faded, replaced by a mutual understanding that they were both important in Liam's life, in different ways. For Amber, the transition was more complicated. She had spent years building a life with Ryan, but Michael's return had stirred up feelings she hadn't anticipated. She loved Ryan, but a part of her still felt connected to Michael in a way that was hard to ignore. One evening, as she sat alone on the back porch, staring out at the stars, Michael stepped outside to join her. Liam had already gone to bed, and the house was quiet. Mind if I sit? Michael asked, his voice soft. Amber shook her head, gesturing to the chair beside her. Go ahead. For a few moments, they sat in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them. The weight of everything that had happened hung in the air between them, unspoken but undeniable. I never thought we'd be here, Amber said quietly, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and nostalgia. Michael nodded, understanding the complexity of her emotion. Neither did I. Amber turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face. Do you ever think about what might have been? Michael's chest tightened at the question. He had thought about it more times than he could count, what their life might have looked like if he had stayed, if he hadn't made the mistakes that had torn them apart. All the time, he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. Amber looked down at her hands, her mind swirling with thoughts she hadn't allowed herself to fully explore. I don't know what to do, Michael. I've built a life with Ryan, and I love him. But you being back, it's complicated. Michael nodded, his heart aching at the truth of her words. I know it is, and I don't want to make things harder for you. Amber sighed, running a hand through her hair. I don't know how to let go of everything we had, even after all these years." Michael reached out and gently placed his hand on hers. "You don't have to make any decisions right now, Em. We've all been through a lot. But whatever happens, I'm here for Liam. That's all that matters." Amber nodded, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "Thank you." For the first time in years, they sat together in silence. The past no longer something they were running from, but something they were learning to live with. It wasn't the ending either of them had imagined, but it was a beginning. One where they could move forward, not as the couple they once were, but as two people dedicated to giving their son the best life possible. And for now, that was enough. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.